If you ever drive through the old highway that cuts across Redwood National Forest, you might notice a small metal sign, mile marker 13. Most people don't think twice about it, but park rangers do. They know better. Because at mile marker 13, strange things happen, and no one wants to talk about them. Even the rangers who've worked there for decades refuse to speak about what they've seen. One of them left a note, just 5 words: "Don't stop at marker 13." Every ranger at Olympic National Park knows about mile marker 13. We just don't talk about it. Not on the radio, not in our reports, and especially not when someone new joins the team. You can ask anyone who's worn the green uniform long enough. They'll all tell you the same thing in different words. You log 12, then you log 14. There is no 13. My name's Ethan Cole. I've been with the Park Service for 14 years, working out of the Lake Crescent Station on the northern edge of Washington State. Most people picture my job as peaceful. Sunlight through evergreens, trails of cedar and mist, the sound of eagles cutting through the wind. And sometimes, yeah, it's exactly that. But there's a reason most rangers drink their coffee black and keep the radio volume low. It's not the animals that scare us out here. It's what the forest remembers. The first time I heard about mile marker 13, I was still a trainee. The veteran guys told me it had been removed after a mudslide years ago. But the map said otherwise. There was a gap between mile 12 and mile 14, just a half-mile stretch of switchbacks through fir and fog. Nobody logged it. Nobody even drove it unless they had to. I figured it was just superstition. Forest folk like their ghost stories. That changed on May 6th last spring. The fog came early that year, dense, gray, heavy as wet cloth. You could taste the minerals from the creek in the air. I'd been assigned to a new partner for the season, Leah Grant, fresh from training in Colorado. She was sharp, quick with a map, and carried herself like she had something to prove. Her laugh was easy, her questions endless, and her curiosity dangerous. We set out before dawn in an ATV, tires crunching on gravel. The air smelled of cedar and cold metal. She rode shotgun, clipboard balanced on her knees, reciting checklist notes like a student before an exam. "Trail inspections 12 through 14, right?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, eyes on the fog curling around the tree line. "Just routine checks." She pointed at her GPS. "But there's a marker between the missing, 13. I didn't answer. The road dipped and the mist thickened, swallowing the beam of our headlights. I knew better than to say the number out loud on patrol. You never mention it. You just don't. "Did they take it down for repairs or something?" she pressed. "Seems weird to skip one." I gave her the standard line. "Maintenance oversight happens all the time." She smirked, unconvinced. "You don't sound sure." I killed the engine. The silence hit harder than I expected. Even the birds had gone quiet. Fog coiled through the trees like smoke. You could hear the tick of the cooling metal under the hood. "Log 12, I said, "then 14. That's all you need to know." She started to laugh, then stopped, because that's when the radio crackled. It wasn't the usual static pop from bad reception. It came in waves, slow, steady, rhythmic. Then it played back my last words. "Log 12, then 14, only softer, like an echo that didn't belong to either of us." Leah frowned. "What the hell was that?" "Dead frequency," I said too quickly. "Happens near the ridge." But it wasn't true. The old-timers told me the same thing back when I was new. Every radio in Olympic goes bad near mile 13, not random, only when someone mentions it. Leah turned the volume down, pretending she wasn't spooked. but I could see her grip tighten on the mic. The rest of the patrol passed without a word. The fog clung to the branches like cobwebs. By the time we hit mile 14, daylight was thinning through the canopy. I remember feeling relief, like crossing an invisible border. At the ranger station, I filed the report as usual. Trail clear, no anomalies. I almost believed it. Almost. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling something had followed us back. I live in a small ranger cabin just off the access road. 1 bedroom, a desk, and a tin roof that turns rain into white noise. I'd been recording voice logs for years, a habit from training. Speak your day aloud before the details fade. That night, I clicked the recorder on. Trail clear up to 14, I said. Minor debris near the ridge. No sign of erosion. Weather holding steady. I clicked stop and tossed the recorder onto the desk. Outside, the rain hit harder, fast and rhythmic. I started peeling off my boots when the recorder clicked again. It wasn't me. The red light blinked once, then twice. The playback wheel spun on its own. My voice filled the room, same words, same tone, but half a beat behind, like someone else was repeating after me. Trail clear up to 14, pause. Then, in my voice, "You still hear it too?" I froze. The rain softened. The air went heavy, the kind of silence that feels like someone holding their breath beside you. The radio on the shelf hissed faintly, static, whispering under the hum of the storm. And underneath it, buried deep in the noise, came the sound of numbers. 12, 14, 12, 14, never 13. When I finally picked up the recorder, my hand was shaking. The tape kept spinning for another 10 seconds, then stopped on its own. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, I convinced myself it was a feedback glitch. Machines do weird things when the air's full of moisture. Still, I logged the incident in my private notes, not the official report. I knew better than to put talking static on paper, but I couldn't ignore what I felt, that the forest hadn't just absorbed my words. It had answered them. The next morning, Leah showed up early, eyes bright with questions and 2 coffees in hand. "Rough night?" she asked. "Could say that." She leaned on the doorframe, casual but observant. "You ever hear about people disappearing on this trail?" "Plenty of stories," I said, brushing past her. "Most are just stories." She followed me to the ATV, not buying it. "My dad used to hike here. Said the fog plays tricks on your head." "That true?" "Depends what you call a trick." She grinned, but her eyes stayed on me. "You're not telling me everything." "No ranger ever does," I said. "Not about this trail." Before we started the next patrol, she checked her GPS again. Still no marker for 13. "Good," I muttered. She gave a half laugh. "You really believe in this stuff?" I didn't answer. I just started the engine. The static flared on the radio for half a second, soft like a breath on the mic. Then it was gone. Later, when I replayed the dash audio from that patrol, I'd swear I heard something layered beneath the static, a whisper just loud enough to catch if you're listening for it. "Don't answer." That was the moment I realized the forest wasn't just echoing us. It was listening. By the 3rd day of patrol, the fog had turned from a curiosity into a presence. It didn't just roll in from the valley anymore. It hung like it had chosen to stay. Everything looked damp and unfinished, like the world itself was waiting for someone to hit resume. That morning, Captain Dorsey called us in for briefing. He was the kind of man whose voice carried more gravel than emotion, a ranger from the old school. No nonsense, no small talk. He'd been working this forest since before I joined the service. Some said he'd seen things near Lake Crescent he couldn't explain. Others said he just stopped trying. Trail conditions? He asked, flipping through my report. Stable, I said. Minor debris near ridge, no new erosion. He nodded, slow. And radio interference. I hesitated. Minimal. That was a lie. The static had been stronger each day, bleeding through channels even when we switched frequencies. Dorsey looked up at me. You're not logging it. With respect, sir, I said carefully. It's not affecting operations. He held my gaze. That's not what I asked. Across the room, Leah sat quietly at her desk, pretending to organize maps, but listening to every word. After a moment, Dorsey sighed. Forget it. Just keep the chatter clean past marker 12. You know the rules. I knew them too well. You log 12, then 14. Don't speak the number between. We left the station around 700 hours. The air had that cold bite of early spring. Somewhere in the trees, a raven called once, sharp, singular, and then silence again, the kind that eats sound whole. Leah broke it first. What's with him? She asked, nodding back toward the station. He talks like you just brought up a family secret. I didn't answer right away. Dorsey's been here long enough to know better than to go asking questions. Yeah, but don't you ever want to know why? Her voice had that mix of curiosity and defiance that only rookies carry. I remembered being like that once, before experience taught me that answers don't always make you safer. I used to, I said. Now I just want to make it home for dinner. We drove in silence for a few miles. Then she leaned over and pointed through the windshield. There, you see that? The marker appeared through the fog like a ghost of itself. A wooden post, weather-beaten, half swallowed by moss. But something was wrong. The number plate wasn't facing the trail like the others. It was turned backward toward the trees. That's it, she said quietly. 13. I felt my stomach tighten, the same cold dread that hits right before a storm. I slowed the ATV but didn't stop. We're not logging that one, I said. Why? It's right there. Looks like it needs maintenance. Because that's not our job. She frowned. Whose is it then? I didn't have an answer. Nobody did. The fog thickened as we passed the marker. For a moment the world felt smaller, just us, the hum of the engine, and the endless white blur of the road. The air changed too. It went heavy, damp, thick enough that breathing felt like pulling water through cloth. Then, without warning, the radio came alive. Not static this time, something else. A faint voice, distant, garbled, almost human. It repeated our coordinates twice, then fell silent. Leah reached for the mic. Base, this is Patrol Unit 2. We're receiving unknown transmission on... I cut her off, snatching the mic from her hand. Don't, she blinked. What? Don't answer it. Her eyes darted between me and the radio. You think it's interference. Doesn't matter what it is, you don't respond. Ever. The voice came again, clearer this time. Patrol Unit 2, confirm location. Only it wasn't Captain Dorsey's voice. It wasn't anyone's we knew. It sounded like a recording of myself, pitched wrong, repeating through a bad speaker. Leah's face went pale. Ethan, that sounds like... I know, I said. Shut it off. The static popped once, then died. Silence again. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. We parked a mile past the ridge and hiked down to the creek bed. Fog curled low around the rocks, faintly luminous in the gray light. The water itself barely made a sound, trickling under sheets of moss. Leah crouched beside the stream, running her fingers through the wet gravel. Looks like someone was here recently, she said. See those boot prints? She was right. 2 sets, both fresh, heading deeper into the woods. Probably hikers, I said. In restricted zone? She countered. Not likely. She was starting to think like a ranger. Unfortunately, that also meant she was starting to notice what didn't add up. We followed the tracks for another 100 yards before they vanished into the undergrowth. The fog got thicker, pressing in close. My ears started to ring, soft, high-pitched, like the faint whine of feedback. That's when I realized something strange. I couldn't hear our footsteps anymore. The sound just stopped existing halfway through each step. "Ethan," Leah whispered, "do you feel that?" I nodded. "Keep moving." The deeper we went, the quieter it became. Birdsong, wind, even the creek, all gone. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was suppression. The forest wasn't silent. It was listening. We reached a clearing just wide enough for one of the old trail signs. The wood was splintered, rotting, half collapsed under moss. But carved into it, deep and deliberate, were 3 words. "Don't call back." Leah exhaled sharply. "That's not funny. It's not supposed to be." She turned toward me. "What does it mean?" "It means we're leaving." We started back the way we came, but the fog was thicker now. The trees all looked the same, repeating endlessly in every direction. My compass needle jittered, then froze, pointing west no matter which way I turned. Leah's voice wavered. "Ethan, are we lost?" "No," I lied. "Just looped." "Looped?" "Yeah, happens sometimes in dense fog. Brain loses spatial reference, starts sending false orientation cues. You think you're walking straight, but you're circling." She nodded, pretending to believe it. But her eyes betrayed the truth. She felt it too. The forest wasn't just disorienting us, it was guiding us. When we finally broke through the fog, we were back near the trailhead. The entire hike should have taken at least an hour. My watch said we'd been gone 8 minutes. Leah didn't say a word the whole ride back. Neither did I. That night, I reviewed the dashcam footage. The feed was normal until the minute we passed the marker. Then the timestamp froze. 07:46 a.m. stayed on screen for almost 6 minutes. The vehicle kept moving, fog shifting, but the clock didn't change. When it finally resumed, we were already past mile 14. And there was something else. For a single frame, barely half a second, a figure appeared in the fog beside the trail. Tall, motionless, no color. Just an outline, human-shaped, facing the road. I replayed it a dozen times. Same thing, always there, always still. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. The figure wasn't facing us, it was facing the marker. I didn't sleep that night either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that still shape standing by the marker, turned toward the trees as if it was waiting for something. I told myself it was a trick of light, that the fog had formed a silhouette. But I knew fog doesn't hold a stance that precise. At 2 a.m., I gave up pretending to rest and drove back to the ranger station. The road was slick from rain, and my headlights carved tunnels through the mist. Inside, the place was hollow and echoing, just the hum of the generator and the smell of old coffee. I unlocked the evidence cabinet and found a box of unarchived tapes, old patrol logs from before the station switched to digital. I wasn't looking for anything specific, only a way to prove that what happened earlier wasn't new. One label stopped me cold. 1999, Spring Patrol 13. The tape's ribbon was warped, but the audio still worked. Static first, then a man's voice. Calm, professional, like all of us sound in the first minute of a shift. Ranger Henry Lowell, mile marker 12 clear, proceeding east. For 5 minutes, nothing unusual. Footsteps, the crunch of gravel, a note about broken fencing, then, faintly, a second voice whispered over his own recording, "Ranger Lowell, over here." He paused. You could hear the confusion in his breath. Then he said, "Copy that?" Silence. Again, the whisper, "Over here." He moved closer, muttering to himself. Then the sound of a twig snapping, a sharp intake of breath. The mic hit the ground, and the tape ended with 10 seconds of steady, rhythmic static like something breathing. I sat there in the dark, listening to that breathing over and over. When the generator kicked off at 3 a.m., the silence in the room matched the tape perfectly. By morning, I had made up my mind. I needed to check the archives in town. The Port Angeles district office sits above the marina, a gray building that smells of mildew and salt. I told the clerk I was updating historical weather data. She gave me a visitor badge and pointed to the basement records room. The shelves were endless rows of green folders, each labeled with park codes. Most were dull. Erosion reports, fire containment plans, trail maintenance schedules. But in the back corner, a row of unlabeled boxes caught my eye. Inside the first one were carbon copies of incident reports, each stamped classified, 13B. Every report told the same story. Rangers or hikers hearing their own voices echoed back from the forest. Some described delayed responses on radios. Others claimed to see shadow observers standing by the marker. The language was bureaucratic, but between the lines you could read fear. The last report was filed by Dorsey himself. I felt a cold rush of adrenaline as I read the final paragraph. Recommendation: suspend public access beyond mile 12, pending geological survey, unverified auditory phenomena. Do not repeat transmissions referencing marker 13. Field frequency compromised. Compromised. That word stuck with me. When I returned to the cabin, Leah was waiting on the porch. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "Where the hell were you?" "Research," I said. She crossed her arms. "I listened to my radio logs from yesterday." And her eyes flicked toward the forest. "Someone said my name." I tried to stay calm. Probably cross-signal interference. Happens when the repeater bounces off the ridge. "It wasn't interference, Ethan. It was my voice." The way she said it, matter of fact, no tremor, made me believe her. She pulled a small digital recorder from her pocket and hit play. Static first, then her voice. Trail conditions stable, approaching 12. Then, a half-beat later, another voice overlapped hers. Identical tone, identical rhythm, only slower. Approaching 12. She stopped the playback. "Tell me that's a glitch." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. That evening, I set up an audio monitor in the cabin, a small experiment. I left one mic facing the window, another pointed toward the radio. I recorded 30 minutes of ambient sound, nothing but wind and rain. But when I played it back, the levels spiked at the 17-minute mark. A low hum rose just below human hearing, climbing in a pattern: 3 pulses, pause, 2 pulses, pause. I ran a spectrogram. The frequency mapped almost perfectly to human speech cadence. Not words. Pattern. I shut off the equipment and stared out into the fog. The pines were still, the world muffled. But I swear I felt the air tighten like pressure before thunder. That's when Leah knocked on my door. "You need to see this." She led me down to the garage. The ATV we'd taken yesterday was still coated in mud, except for one spot on the passenger door, wiped clean, as if by a handprint. Inside the windshield, written faintly in the condensation, were 3 numbers: 47,2, Coordinates. I punched them into my GPS. The location popped up less than half a mile north of marker 13, a stretch of trail that shouldn't even exist. Could be vandals, Leah said, though she didn't sound convinced. Or something left over from the old search parties, I offered. She looked up at me. You mean the ones nobody files anymore? We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, she said, we should check it out. Every instinct in me screamed to say no. But curiosity is a kind of gravity. It pulls you whether you move willingly or not. Tomorrow at first light, I said. No radios, just analog recorders. We stay together, and if anything feels wrong, we turn back. She nodded, relief and fear blending in her eyes. Deal. That night, I dreamed of the forest breathing. Each inhale drew the fog closer. Each exhale carried my name into the dark. When I woke, the clock read 4:13 a.m. The radio light was blinking. I hadn't turned it on. I crossed the room and lifted the receiver. Only static, but beneath it faintly a voice threaded through. Mine, unmistakably. Don't be late. The transmission cut. The silence that followed felt almost polite. I sat back on the edge of the bed, heart hammering. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe my brain was looping the sounds from the tape earlier. But when I looked out the window, the fog was already moving down from the ridge, slow and deliberate, like it knew exactly where I lived. Morning would come soon, and with it, whatever waited at those coordinates near mile marker 13. At dawn, the forest looked harmless. Morning mist hovered low over the ground, turning the ferns silver, and the air smelled clean, almost sweet. Nothing about it hinted that it could swallow sound or steal a voice. That was the trick of this place. It waited until you believed the world was ordinary before showing you it wasn't. Leah and I left the station without telling anyone. We packed light, 1 compass, 2 analog recorders, headlamps, and enough water for half a day. The sky was pale gray, and rain clouds clung to the mountains beyond Lake Crescent. Ready? She asked, pulling her jacket hood up. As I'll ever be. We took the service road until the trail forked near mile marker 12. The sign stood slick with dew, the paint flaking, the number barely visible through moss. Beyond it, the trail narrowed into a corridor of wet pines. For the first mile, everything was routine. Our boots crunched through needles. The creek whispered somewhere below. Then the fog thickened, not gradually, but in a single breath, as if someone had exhaled into the trees. My compass needle began to twitch. Ethan, Leah said quietly, we're close. Coordinates read within 30 yards. The GPS beeped once and froze. Its display turned white. No signal. I tapped it, but the screen stayed blank. Dead zone? She asked. Maybe. We slowed our pace. The forest here felt denser, the trunks spaced evenly like pillars. Somewhere ahead, a raven cawed once and went silent. The air grew colder. Moisture collected in my beard, turning each breath visible. The trail dipped into a shallow hollow where the fog pooled like smoke. Through it, I saw something glint, metal, half buried in moss. I crouched. It was a signpost, splintered at the base. The number plate hung by one screw. When I brushed the dirt away, the faded paint revealed the number 13. Leah knelt beside me. You think this is the old marker? Has to be. She looked up at the trees, voice trembling despite her effort to sound calm. Then what's the one on the road? I didn't answer because I was staring at something else. A patch of ground beside the sign was flattened, the soil disturbed as if someone had been kneeling there recently. In the mud, half obscured by pine needles, lay a small rusted badge, National Park Service issue. The nameplate was gone. Only the word Ranger remained. I slipped it into my pocket. Let's keep moving. We hiked north, following the coordinates manually now, counting steps. The forest pressed closer. The fog was so thick we could see only 10 feet ahead. My boots sank into soft ground that smelled faintly metallic. "Ethan," Leah said, "listen." At first I thought she meant the silence again, but there was sound, faint, rhythmic, like two slow heartbeats overlapping. A hum, low and mechanical, rising and falling in the same pattern I'd recorded in my cabin. "Could be wind through the ridge," I said, but my voice didn't sound convinced. She pointed toward a break in the trees. "It's coming from there." We stepped into a small clearing, no larger than a living room. In the center stood an old communication pole, its cables long severed. The base was scorched as though lightning had hit it years ago. From the top hung a single wire, swaying gently. Every time it moved, the hum deepened. Leah lifted her recorder. "Do you hear that pulse?" I nodded. She adjusted the mic gain and pressed record. The red light blinked once, then twice. "It's faint, but it's repeating something." We both listened. The hum resolved into pattern, then cadence, and finally into something unmistakable. Syllables. "2, Ranger, 2, then a pause. "Confirm location." Her eyes widened. "That's the same voice from yesterday." The hair on my neck rose. It wasn't just the same voice. It was mine. I took the recorder from her, staring at the blinking red light. The message came again, this time clearer. "Ranger Cole, confirm location." Leah whispered, "That's you." I wanted to deny it, but the voice matched every inflection, every breath. "Cut it off," I said. Before she could, the wire above us snapped once like a whip, and the hum stopped. The air collapsed into stillness so deep it pressed against my eardrums. Then, from behind us, a whisper. "Over here." Leah spun, flashlight cutting through fog. "Who's there?" No answer. "Probably echo," I said, but the words felt hollow. We backed toward the trail. That's when we noticed the ground around the clearing. Footprints, dozens of them, overlapping, circling the same space, all different sizes, some deep and fresh, others filled with water and leaves. "People have been here," Leah murmured, "or something that walks like them." The fog began to move, not drift, but move. Long strands uncoiled between the trees, curling toward us. The forest groaned softly, a deep creak of wood bending under weight. Leah grabbed my sleeve. "We need to go." We turned and ran. The fog followed, rolling low across the ground, twisting through roots and stumps. Every few seconds, a voice, sometimes hers, sometimes mine, called from somewhere ahead. "Ethan! Leah! Over here!" Each voice came from a different direction. "Don't answer," I said. "Just keep moving." Branches whipped against our faces. My lungs burned. Then out of nowhere, we broke through the tree line onto the service road. The air hit warm, clear, as though we'd stepped from one world into another. We didn't stop until we reached the ATV. Both of us bent over, gasping. Leah looked back. It stopped following. The forest behind us was still again. Not peaceful, just waiting. We drove in silence. The radio stayed off. When we reached the station, Dorsey was standing on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the fog roll over the ridge. He didn't look surprised to see us early. "Didn't expect you back so soon," he said. "Trail's unstable," I told him. "You should restrict access past 12. He nodded slowly. "Already done." Leah frowned. "You knew?" Dorsey sipped his coffee. "We all know, Grant. We just learn when to stop asking. I wanted to push him, to demand what he meant, but something in his eyes stopped me. Not fear exactly. Resignation, the look of a man who's outlived too many questions. Inside the station, I played back Leah's recording. The signal was faint but audible. Underneath my duplicated voice, another layer whispered, almost too soft to catch. I turned up the volume. Don't look back. Then the file corrupted. I closed the recorder and stared out the window. The fog was rising again, crawling over the tree line toward the road. I thought of all those reports stamped 13B, all those names erased from the logs. And for the first time in my life as a ranger, I understood why some rules exist without explanation, because sometimes the reason is listening. 2 days passed before either of us said the word 13 again. We went through the motions, trail inspections, wildlife reports, mechanical checks, but it all felt like acting. The silence between us wasn't tension, it was memory. Every time I drove past the ridge, I saw that fog waiting just beyond the tree line, like a living curtain. The air changed there. Even the ravens wouldn't cross it. I tried to tell myself what we'd seen, the footprints, the whisper, the hum, was all explainable. But lies don't work when you know the truth in your bones. On the third night, I found Leah in the equipment shed, sitting on a crate with her hands clasped tight around her radio. She'd been crying. "You ever dream about it?" she asked without looking up. I hesitated. "Yeah." She nodded, still staring at the ground. Mine keep looping. Same trail, same fog. Every time I turn around, I'm back where I started, but the voices sound closer. I leaned against the doorframe. Dreams can do that. The brain repeats trauma until it files it away. She gave a hollow laugh. Then mine's got a long way to go. After a moment, she said, "I want to know what that badge was, the one you found near the marker." I hadn't told her I'd kept it. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled it out. The brass was worn smooth, but under the right light, you could still make out the faint shadow where a nameplate had been. "Ranger Henry Lowell," I said quietly. "I found his patrol tape in the archives." Her eyes widened. "The one who disappeared in '99? I nodded. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wasn't sure it mattered." "And now?" "Now I'm not sure it doesn't." We decided to take a chance. Captain Dorsey kept most of the old physical records locked in his office, but every regional station had duplicates in the main logbooks, filed by year, by incident type. If we could find Lowell's personnel folder, maybe we'd find something that wasn't blacked out. We waited until after dark. Dorsey was staying at the superintendent's lodge that week, which meant we had a clear window. Leah handled the lock. She was better at that sort of thing. Inside, the office smelled of cedar oil and paper. A single desk lamp glowed over stacks of unfinished reports. "Check the bottom drawer," I whispered. She knelt, flipping through folders until she found the one labeled 1999, Silver Creek Division. The pages were yellowed, the corners curled. Inside was Lowell's incident report, typed in the clipped, bureaucratic tone all rangers use when they're scared but can't admit it. 5/14/99 routine patrol, mile marker. 13 omitted, radio static persistent, intermittent auditory feedback. Team advised not to respond to unidentified signal. Field note, voices align with known speech patterns, mimicry precise. At the bottom, in handwriting, "Do not repeat what was heard." "Same phrase as the memo you found," Leah said softly. "Yeah." She turned another page. A photograph slipped out, an old Polaroid, overexposed and blurred. It showed a figure standing in fog, back turned, facing a crooked wooden post. Even distorted, I recognized the clearing. "That's the place," I said. Leah's breathing quickened. "We should scan this, send it to regional." "No, if we send it, it'll vanish like everything else. We keep copies ourselves." Before she could reply, a sound drifted through the office window, faint static like a radio keyed half on. Then, clear as breath, a voice whispered, "Ranger Cole, report status." We both froze. Leah's radio was on the desk, turned off. The sound came from outside. "Stay here," I said. I stepped onto the porch, the night air damp against my skin. The fog had crept down from the ridge again, covering the gravel lot in a thin white sheet. The voice came once more, closer this time. "Ethan." Not a shout, not even a call. Just my name, spoken like someone standing 3 feet behind me. I turned. Nothing. "Ethan, answer." My pulse jumped. I recognized that voice. It was Leah's, but she was still inside the office. I walked backward toward the door, every instinct screaming not to turn around. Inside, Leah's eyes were wide. "Did you? I heard you," I said. "But it wasn't you." We locked the office and left everything as it was. Neither of us spoke on the drive back. The fog followed us almost to the station gate before fading into the trees. By morning, Dorsey was back. He called me into his office before sunrise, coffee in hand, eyes bloodshot. "You broke into my files," he said flatly. I didn't deny it. "Then you know what happened to Lowell." "I know the report was edited," he exhaled. "Edited is one word for it." "What really happened out there?" I asked. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Lowell heard something on patrol. A voice he thought was his partner's. He answered it. Next thing we knew, both were gone. We found his recorder a week later, 10 feet from the creek. The tape inside was blank, except for breathing. 2 sets of it." Leah stepped in. "Why keep working here if you knew all that?" "Because someone has to," Dorsey said simply. "The park doesn't stop existing just because we're afraid of it." He looked at me for a long moment. "If you're smart, you'll stop digging. Whatever that thing is, it's not ours to understand." Then he handed me a sealed envelope. "Transfer papers," he said, "for both of you. North Cascades. Good station, quiet trails. Take the offer." Leah opened it. "Effective immediately? Consider it a favor," Dorsey said. "Leave this ridge behind." But as we left his office, the radio on his desk flickered to life. Static, then a voice, low and wrong, half an octave off. "Captain Dorsey," it said, "confirm transfer." He stared at it, face draining of color. "It doesn't stop," he murmured. "Not even here. We didn't take the transfer. Maybe we should have." Leah called it unfinished business. I called it stupidity. But there was something deeper under both of those words. Guilt. The kind that crawls under your ribs and whispers that if you don't see it through, you'll never sleep again. That night, I packed my bag with maps, the old analog recorder, Lowell's badge, and the Polaroid. Leah brought her field camera and a compass that had belonged to her father. We didn't tell Dorsey. We didn't tell anyone. The plan was simple. Follow the ridge north, trace the old emergency paths, and find the coordinates again in daylight. We thought we were ready. We weren't. The fog rolled in before sunrise, thicker than before, sliding down from the mountains like a tide. Every breath felt damp. The ground gleamed under the flashlight beams, slick with dew. We hiked in silence until we reached the fork near 12. The new marker gleamed faintly through the gray. Leah stopped beside it. "You know this is insane," she said. "Absolutely," I replied. We moved on. The first few miles passed quietly. The forest seemed calmer in daylight. Sound returned. Birds chattered. Wind rustled the canopy. But the deeper we went, the more it changed. It wasn't that the birds stopped singing. They faded, one by one, until even the air felt thinner. At the half-mile point, Leah checked her compass. The needle spun once and froze, pointing east, same as before. She tried to make a joke out of it. Maybe the forest just doesn't like directions. I smiled, but it didn't last, because in that moment the forest exhaled. You could feel it. The air shifted temperature, the fog rippled like fabric, and a low hum began, subtle at first, like wind caught in a bottle. Then it grew deeper, resonant, pulsing through the soil. "That's not wind," Leah whispered. "No," I said, "it's not." We crouched beside a fallen log and listened. The sound carried rhythm. 2 long beats, 1 short. Pause. Repeat. I recognized it instantly, the same pattern that had shown up in the spectrogram from my cabin recording. Leah adjusted her camera, setting it to audio mode. "Let's record it." The moment she hit the button, the hum stopped. Complete silence. She frowned. Why would... Then her camera screen glitched. The display flickered once, twice, then froze on a single frame. Us, crouched by the log, but behind us, through the fog, a faint shape loomed. Tall, indistinct, humanoid. Leah gasped. "Ethan!" I turned, flashlight raised. Nothing. Just mist and pine trunks. "It's gone," I said, though the words didn't sound like mine. We pressed on, slower now, counting every step. I checked the GPS every 100 feet, still no signal. At 47,802 latitude, the same coordinates etched on the ATV window, the forest opened into a narrow glade. In the center stood a structure I'd never seen before. It looked like an old survey station, a steel tripod anchored in concrete, cables running into the earth, a small control box half swallowed by moss. The paint was peeling, but the plaque on its side was still legible. U.S. Geological Survey, installed 1998. Leah crouched beside it. So this was real. Lowell's year. The control box clicked softly like a dying relay. I brushed the moss away and saw the switch. It was still on. "How's that possible?" she asked. "No power source would last that long." I tapped the metal casing. It was warm. Before I could answer, a burst of static filled the clearing, sharp, clean, like a radio being keyed open. Then, layered through it, a whisper. "Don't move." I froze. Leah's eyes darted around. "That was your voice." "I didn't say it." The whisper came again, clearer. "Don't move." Then, faintly, another voice, hers. "Ethan, behind you." We turned at the same time, flashlights cutting across fog. And there, half hidden between the trees, stood 2 figures. They weren't solid, not quite. The fog wrapped around them like smoke clinging to bone. Their outlines flickered like bad reception on an old television. Both were facing the marker, unmoving. Leah lifted her camera, hands trembling. "They're not reacting." "Don't approach," I said. The hum started again, louder now, vibrating through the ground. My teeth hurt from the pressure. The figures began to shift, not walking, not floating, just rearranging. Then, like static clearing from a bad signal, they vanished. Silence fell. My recorder clicked twice in my pocket. I didn't touch it. The light blinked red, meaning it had activated on its own. We stood there for nearly a minute before Leah spoke. "You know what this means, right? That we're out of our depth? That we have proof." I looked at the spot where the figures had been. The ground was undisturbed. No prints, no heat signature. But the air still buzzed faintly, like an invisible current. "Proof won't matter," I said. Nobody wants to believe the forest listens back. She knelt beside the survey box again. What if it's not listening? What if it's recording? The question hit harder than I expected, because if she was right, if this wasn't supernatural but something human, then it meant someone had built this. Someone had turned Mile 13 into an experiment. We stayed until dusk, gathering what we could: photographs, soil samples, a few fragments of wire. The fog never fully left. It lingered around us like a warning. When we finally started back, Leah paused and looked over her shoulder. "Do you hear that?" I did. Footsteps, faint, steady, just out of sync with ours, like an echo half a second behind. We stopped. The sound stopped. We moved again. It followed. Leah's breathing quickened. "It's copying us." "Keep walking," I said. Every instinct screamed to run, but I knew better. The forest thrives on reaction. The second you panic, it learns your rhythm. By the time we reached the ATV, the sound was gone. Back at the station, Dorsey's truck was parked by the porch. He was waiting, expression unreadable. "You ignored a transfer order," he said. "Yeah," I replied. He sighed. "Then you might as well see this." He handed me a thin folder. Inside were 6 photographs, different parks, different years, but each one showed the same thing: a fog-covered trail, a wooden marker turned backward, and faint silhouettes standing near it. At the bottom, typed in bold, were the words, "Project 7A, Auditory Mimicry Study, Terminated." Leah looked at me, then at Dorsey. "What is this?" He rubbed his temples. "Something that was supposed to help us understand wilderness acoustics. Frequency mapping, echo response, infrasound testing. They said it was harmless." "And it wasn't," I said. "No," he admitted. "It wasn't." He looked out the window, voice barely above a whisper. "It started copying people." For a long time, no one spoke. Rain drummed on the station roof, slow and steady, while the 3 of us stared at the folder like it might vanish if we blinked. Finally, Leah broke the silence. "What do you mean it started copying people?" Dorsey leaned back in his chair. The lines around his mouth were deep, cut there by years of things he didn't say out loud. Back in the late 90s, the Park Service partnered with a research team out of Tacoma. They wanted to study how sound carries through dense forest terrain, natural acoustics, resonance, infrasound. The idea was to improve emergency response signals. He paused, rubbing his thumb along the edge of the folder. They installed a network of buried transmitters along several trails. Mile 13 was one of them. Each transmitter could record, replicate, and broadcast human speech within a narrow frequency range. Only problem was, he trailed off. "Go on," I said. "It didn't stop broadcasting when they shut the project down. The system started triggering itself, recording voices from open radio channels, repeating them at random intervals. At first it was just echoes, distortions. Then," Leah's eyes widened. "Then it got smarter." He nodded. "It began answering." I felt the room tilt slightly, the same way it does right before a storm hits. "You're telling me this thing out there, the voices, the echoes, it's a machine?" "It was," Dorsey said. "Maybe it still is. Or maybe it became something else. Nobody really knows." The team sealed the equipment in 1999. Officially, it was removed. Unofficially, they just buried it and left. Leah flipped through the photos again, her hands trembling. "So Lowell, he must have found one of the transmitters." "Or one found him," Dorsey said. "After he disappeared, they shut everything down and classified it as a geological hazard. That's why we skipped from 12 to 14. keeps the public off the trail. I could feel my pulse in my throat. And you kept working here anyway. He gave a bitter laugh. Someone has to keep an eye on the things we pretend don't exist. After Dorsey left, Leah and I sat on the porch, listening to the wind sift through the pines. Every few minutes, static cracked faintly through the radio on the desk inside, short bursts like breaths. "Do you believe him?" she asked. "Doesn't matter," I said. "Whatever's out there, it's not just a machine anymore. It's been 25 years. If it's still active, it's adapting." Leah hugged her knees, staring into the mist. "Then what do we do?" "Find the control hub," I said. "If we can locate the main relay, we can shut it down." Her eyes flicked toward me. "You think that'll stop it?" "I think it's the only thing left to try." We started the next morning before dawn. The rain had stopped, but the sky hung low and colorless. Dorsey didn't ask where we were going. Maybe he knew he couldn't stop us. The coordinates from the research map pointed to an area north of the ridge, past a section of fallen timber and unstable cliffs. We hiked for hours, the ground soft and slick underfoot. By noon, the fog had returned, moving in slow waves across the forest floor. "Feels heavier today," Leah said. "Pressure's dropping," I replied. "Storm incoming." She shook her head. "Not that kind of heavy." The trees grew closer together until their branches touched overhead, turning daylight into a dim green gloom. Every sound was dampened, wrapped in cotton. Then faintly, we heard it, the same low hum from before, only steadier, almost melodic. Leah glanced at me. "It's active again." "Stay close." The trail narrowed between two slabs of granite, forming a natural corridor. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the rock. When we reached the end, the forest opened into a wide clearing. And there it was. Half buried under a tangle of roots stood a metal tower, maybe 15 feet tall. The top was bent, the steel corroded with rust, but at its base was a small hatch, sealed with a padlock stamped USGS property. Leah knelt beside it. "This must be the central node." I tested the lock, old, brittle. One hit with the butt of my flashlight, and it snapped. The hatch creaked open, releasing a gust of warm, stale air. Inside, a control panel blinked faintly, green and amber lights flickering like dying fireflies. The machinery hummed, deep and steady. "This thing shouldn't still be running," Leah said. I brushed dust off the main interface. The switches were labeled in faded tape: input, output, loop, record. Every one of them was on. "Loop," Leah read. "What does that mean?" "It's set to rebroadcast," I said. "Continuous signal relay." She pointed to a slot marked Voice Sample A. A thin wire led from it into the soil, disappearing beneath the roots. "Ethan," she whispered, "it's still recording." As if in answer, the hum deepened, the lights brightened, and from somewhere below us came the faint sound of footsteps. We froze. The footsteps grew louder, circling the clearing. I aimed my flashlight into the trees. Nothing but fog. Then, from behind the tower, a voice spoke. "Ranger Cole, step away from the relay." It was my voice, every syllable perfect, every inflection exact. Leah's hand went to her recorder. "That's—" "I know," I said. The voice came again. "Step away from the relay." Leah raised her light, aiming it toward the sound. The beam caught movement, a silhouette emerging from the mist. Same height, same build. Even the way it tilted its head was mine. I felt the ground tilt. "Stay behind me," I whispered. The figure stopped 10 feet away. The fog clung to its outline, never showing detail. Then, slowly, it raised its hand, the same way I had moments ago when signaling Leah to stop. I heard myself speak, but my mouth didn't move. "Don't touch it." The voice came from the thing in the fog. Leah's recorder clicked, automatically starting. The red light blinked. The sound made the figure flinch, just slightly, and then it began to fade, dissolving back into the mist like smoke caught in a draft. When it was gone, the relay lights dimmed. Leah looked at me. "You think it was projecting you?" "I think it was answering." She crouched near the open hatch, studying the controls. "These settings, it's not random. Someone's been adjusting them recently. Look at the dust patterns." She was right. A thin line marked the switches, fingerprints fresh against the grime. "Who would even know this is here?" I asked. "Someone who didn't want it shut down." We backed away, sealing the hatch as best we could. The hum subsided, replaced by a faint rustle of wind. But as we left the clearing, Leah stopped. "Ethan," she whispered, look." At the edge of the fog, 3 new footprints had appeared beside ours. Same boot type, same size, except they were leading toward the clearing, not away from it. That night, back at the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't left anything behind, that maybe something had followed. The fog pressed against the windows like breath on glass. When I played back the recording Leah made, the audio was warped by interference. But near the end, buried under static, a voice whispered, "Next time, bring the other one." I shut it off and sat there in the dark, listening to the rain. The forest, somewhere beyond the window, whispered back. By dawn, neither of us had slept. The cabin smelled of cold coffee and damp wool, and the air had that thick, motionless weight that comes right before the weather breaks. Leah sat by the window, her recorder clutched in both hands. I could see the reflection of her face in the glass, pale, drawn, eyes wide and hollow from exhaustion. "I ran a frequency sweep on that recording," she said finally. "The whisper at the end, it's at 40 hertz. Infrasound," I said, "low enough to bypass conscious hearing." She nodded. "And it's not random. The signal strength rises every time we speak near the equipment. It's like it's learning how to focus." She said the word learning without thinking, but once it was out there, neither of us could take it back. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Maybe it's not alive. Maybe it's just feedback, a loop that built its own algorithm. She looked at me, her expression half a challenge. "And the footprints?" I didn't have an answer. When we reported back to Dorsey, he didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at the floor, the folder of Project 7A open on his desk. The gray light coming through the window made him look older, more fragile, like the forest had been slowly feeding on him for years. "Who else knows about this?" I asked. "Officially?" he said. "No one. The last person assigned to the research team left the service 15 years ago." "And unofficially?" Dorsey sighed. "Unofficially, there's a name you'll see on the back page." He slid a sheet across the desk. "Dr. Marcus Havelock, Acoustic Systems Consultant, USGS." Leah scanned it. "Is he still alive?" "Last I heard, living somewhere near Port Townsend," Dorsey said. "Retired, completely off-grid. But if anyone knows what they buried out there, it's him." He hesitated. "If you go, keep your radios off. Whatever that thing is, it piggybacks on open frequencies." I nodded. "We'll find him." "You might find more than that," Dorsey said quietly. The drive along Highway 101 was long and colorless. Rain swept across the windshield in thin sheets, blurring the outlines of the trees. Leah stared out the window the whole way, her voice quiet when she finally spoke. "Do you think Dorsey's scared?" "Of the fog," I said. "No, he's scared of the part that listens." We found Havelock's cabin near the edge of a cliff overlooking the strait. The place looked abandoned. Half the roof caved in, moss climbing up the walls. But there was smoke coming from the chimney. When we knocked, the door opened an inch. A man's voice rasped, "Park Service?" I flashed my badge. "Ranger Cole. We're following up on a defunct USGS Project 7A. The door opened wider. Havelock was in his 70s, thin, with gray hair tied back and eyes that looked far too sharp for his age. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "That project died for a reason." "We found one of the relays," I said, "still running." He stared at us for a long moment before stepping aside. "Come in then. You might as well hear the rest." The cabin's interior was lined with maps, graphs, and photos. Decades of research pinned to warped plywood walls. Havelock poured coffee into 3 mismatched cups and sat heavily at the table. "You think you know what that relay is," he said. "You don't." "Then tell us," Leah said. He took a sip of coffee, his hands trembling slightly. It started simple. We were trying to map natural resonance, how sound waves move through terrain. The transmitters were designed to mimic human frequencies, to trace how far a voice could travel through fog, soil, and rock. He looked up at us. "But the environment responded." "Responded how?" I asked. "At first it was just feedback, echoes bouncing through the network. Then the echoes started repeating at intervals that didn't match our broadcast pattern. We tried shutting them down. They'd restart on their own." Leah leaned forward. "You think the system became self-sustaining?" Havelock shook his head slowly. "It wasn't the system. It was the land. The resonance wasn't bouncing. It was absorbing. The forest started carrying those frequencies, using them like language." He tapped the table for emphasis. "Every sound we made, every word we tested, it stored. Then it began choosing which ones to return." The room seemed to shrink. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the shutters. I asked, "You're saying the fog talks because of your experiment?" He smiled without humor. "Not exactly. It's more accurate to say we gave it a voice." Leah's recorder beeped, signaling low battery. Havelock's eyes flicked to it. "You shouldn't use that in here." "Why?" she asked. "Because it hears through those too. Anything that listens is a doorway." He stood, moving to the window. "You said you found the relay still running." "Yes," I said. "We shut it off." "Then you made it angry," he murmured. "It doesn't like interruptions." "It?" Leah repeated. "You're talking about it like it's alive." Havelock turned, and for the first time his voice wavered. "You think ecosystems are dead things? You think the Earth doesn't hear us? It learned from us, our radios, our recordings, our need to speak into silence. You feed it a voice long enough, it grows one of its own." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And once it learns your rhythm, it never forgets." A thunderclap shook the cabin. The lights flickered. My radio, switched off, let out a faint hiss. Havelock's face went gray. "It followed you." Leah's hand tightened on the recorder. "We left the ridge hours ago." "Time doesn't matter to it," Havelock said. "It moves through vibration, not space." He turned and grabbed a map from the wall, slamming it onto the table. "You need to destroy every relay node. If the loop closes again, it'll amplify. Once it does, the whole forest will hum with it." "Then what?" I asked. "Then it won't need equipment anymore." The air inside the cabin changed, denser, humming faintly. The coffee cups on the table began to tremble. Havelock backed away. It's already listening. Outside, fog was pouring down the hill from the tree line, rolling toward the cabin like a tide of smoke. The humming deepened into something almost human, 1,000 overlapping voices whispering just below hearing range. Leah whispered, "Ethan, I know." We ran for the truck. The fog hit us halfway down the drive, cold, wet, heavy. The sound inside it was deafening, not noise, but words, fragments of speech folding over themselves. Ranger Cole, Leah Grant, don't move, don't answer. Each phrase was ours, recycled, rearranged, stitched together. I slammed the truck door and gunned the engine. The fog thinned only when we reached the highway. Behind us, Havelock's cabin disappeared in the white. We didn't talk for a long time. The radio stayed off, but the sound lingered anyway. Inside the cab, inside our heads. The same pulse, the same rhythm. I realized it wasn't mimicking us anymore. It was speaking with us. By the time we reached the station, the sky had cleared. Dorsey was waiting by the porch again, but this time his face was white with shock. He held a radio in one hand. "It's everywhere," he said. "What is?" "The signal. It's bleeding through every frequency. Dispatch, weather, even emergency channels." The radio in his hand crackled. Then a voice, deep and distant, spoke. "We are still listening." The three of us stared at the speaker. The signal faded, replaced by a soft hum that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Leah turned to me, her voice barely audible. "What do we do now?" I looked out at the ridge, where the fog was already forming again, coiling like smoke that refused to die. "We finish it," I said. "Whatever this thing is, we started it. Now we end it." The radio clicked once more, as if in response. "Yes, Ranger Cole," it whispered. "End it." By the time morning came, none of us trusted the silence anymore. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. The static had stopped after that final transmission. "We are still listening." But it wasn't relief I felt. It was absence, like someone stepping out of a room but leaving their hand on the door. Leah sat at the station desk, eyes locked on the radio. Dorsey hadn't said a word since sunrise. He looked smaller, drained, as though the fog had taken something from him too. Finally, he said, "The transmissions aren't local anymore." He slid a map across the table. Dozens of red pins marked national parks across the western states. "These are reports from dispatch," he said. "Shortwave interference, same frequencies as ours, and it's spreading." "How far?" I asked. "Denali, Shenandoah, Grand Teton, Yellowstone." Leah leaned closer, whispering, "All the ones with old Project 7A sites." Dorsey nodded. "Looks like the signal's moving through the old relay grid. The entire network might still be buried out there." The realization hit me like a punch. It's using the grid like a nervous system. Dorsey gave a grim half-smile. "Congratulations, Cole. You finally learned to think like it does." I rubbed my temples. "How do we stop something that can move through every open frequency?" "You don't," he said. "You isolate. You find the root and cut the connection." Leah looked at me. "The root's still here. Mile 13. Dorsey turned toward the window, fog already gathering beyond the trees. "Then you better move fast." We left before noon, heading toward Port Angeles to access the main records vault. Leah drove. I sat in the passenger seat, scanning through printed maps and old service memos. The road wound through the forest like a spine, the canopy swallowing most of the light. "You really think there's a paper trail?" Leah asked. "There's always a paper trail," I said. You just have to dig deep enough to find what they didn't erase." She smiled faintly. "You sound like you've done this before." I didn't answer, because I had. The regional archive was built like a bunker, concrete walls, no windows, fluorescent lighting that made everything look jaundiced. A bored clerk scanned our badges and waved us through to the back room. The temperature dropped 10 degrees past the security door. Rows of metal filing cabinets stretched to the ceiling. It smelled of dust and paper rot. We found the National Park Service Incident Index, 1990-2020. Each entry listed event codes and classifications. When I reached 13B, my stomach tightened. "Here," I said. Leah read over my shoulder. "Auditory phenomena unverified, site codes, Olympic, Yosemite, Denali, Shenandoah, Grand Teton." Next to each was the same note, redacted per Federal Directive 7A, discontinued. "Look at the dates," she said. "Each report filed the same week, June 9th. "Different years," I said, "but always June 9th. She ran a finger along the column. "It's like it renews itself." I opened the drawer below. Inside was a manila envelope with no label. The paper inside was thin and brittle from age. Across the top, stamped in red, was a single phrase, "Operation Recursion." Leah read aloud, "Replication sequence detected. Auditory entities exhibit learning pattern based on vocal imprint of field operators. Recommendation, suspend study indefinitely." She looked at me. "Replication sequence? Means it's not just repeating sound, it's building from it." We turned the page. At the bottom was a grainy photo of a fog-covered clearing. In the center stood 3 figures, blurred, indistinct. Underneath was a typed note, "Audio file fragment recovered. Subject identifies self within recording. Self-recognition failure. Cognitive dissonance observed." I felt my pulse hammer. "This isn't just mimicry," I said. "It's identity feedback." Leah frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning it's copying who you are. Not just your voice, your rhythm, your tone, maybe even your thoughts." She stepped back, shaking her head. "No, that's impossible. Tell that to the footprints that follow us." We spent the next hour photographing everything, each document, each memo. When we finally left, the clerk at the desk gave us a strange look. "You two with the audit team?" I hesitated. "What audit team?" He shrugged. "A couple of agents came through yesterday, said they were pulling old files on the same project." Leah and I exchanged a look. "Did they say where they were heading?" I asked. "Back toward the park," he said. "Said they needed to verify a containment structure, whatever that means." Containment. That word echoed in my skull the entire drive back. We hit the access road just after dark. The fog was waiting for us, thick, low, unnatural. "Doesn't look good," Leah said. "It never does." We turned the corner near the ridge and saw them. 2 black SUVs parked near the trailhead. Engines still running, lights off. Leah slowed the truck. "That's them." I scanned the clearing. No movement. The fog shimmered in the headlights like it was breathing. "Stay in the vehicle," I said. I stepped out, radio clipped to my vest. "Park Service," I called. "Anyone here?" No response, just the faint hiss of static bleeding through the night. Then from somewhere in the fog, "Ranger Cole." I froze. The voice came from behind the SUVs. "Leah," I whispered, "turn the lights on." The beams cut through the mist, and for half a second I saw them. 2 figures standing side by side, not armed, not moving, faces pale, eyes wide open. Then the light flickered and they were gone. Leah jumped out, flashlight raised. "Ethan, there's..." Stay close. We crept forward. The doors of the SUVs were open. Inside, the seats were empty, except for equipment cases, recorders, monitors, power cells, all still running. Leah lifted one of the recorders. The display glowed green. "It's still recording," she said. She hit playback. At first, nothing but static, then faintly a man's voice. "Testing 1, 2, field anomaly stable, repeat sequence." A second voice interrupted him. "Don't say it again." Then a scream, high, sharp, cut off mid-breath. The recording ended. We both stood there, the fog curling around our legs. Leah whispered, "Ethan, look." On the SUV's windshield, moisture had gathered in a perfect circle. Inside it, written in a finger's stroke, were 3 words: "Don't call back." We didn't stop driving until we were 20 miles from the ridge. The fog followed us for half that distance. It never touched the truck, just kept pace like a shadow staying in peripheral vision. At a gas station outside Forks, Leah leaned against the hood, shaking. "We can't contain this. It's too big." "Maybe," I said, "but somebody tried before. Maybe they left a way to finish it." I pulled one of the photos from my pocket. The old relay structure, the one we'd found buried. At the bottom corner, etched faintly into the metal, was a number I hadn't noticed before. 07A Route, Phase 1, Redwood. "Redwood National Forest," I said. "The first test site." Leah stared at the photo, her expression unreadable. "You're thinking cross-state investigation?" I nodded. "If this network started there, maybe the core's still active. Shut down the source, the rest might die." She sighed. "And if it doesn't?" I looked at the map. "Then we make sure it never finds another voice to learn." The air was heavy with diesel and pine resin. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled over the hills. I thought about Havelock, his cabin swallowed in fog, his voice warning us that every sound is a doorway, and I knew we'd already stepped through it. The forest wasn't following us. It was inside the network now, and it was still listening. We hit the road before dawn, heading south on Highway 101. The fog clung to the coast like a tide that didn't know when to stop, rolling over the cliffs and into the forest in slow, deliberate waves. The farther we drove, the weaker the signal on our radios became, until the speakers carried nothing but a low pulse that rose and fell with the rhythm of our breathing. Leah sat silent beside me, eyes fixed on the gray blur beyond the windshield. She'd barely spoken since Forks. It wasn't fear that quieted her, it was the weight of realization. We weren't just chasing a signal anymore, we were chasing something that could think. "Redwood," she said finally. "You sure that's where it started?" "Every trail leads there," I said. "If the route node still exists, it's in the original test zone, northern sector, restricted access since 2004. She gave a tired laugh. "Of course it's restricted." We crossed into California by mid-afternoon. The rain followed us all the way down, thin and constant, a curtain between the world we'd left and the one we were driving toward. When we reached the outskirts of Oric, I pulled into a ranger substation to refuel. The building looked abandoned, but the lights were on inside. A woman in uniform stepped out as we parked. Her badge read, "Captain Morella Ortiz." "You two from Olympic?" she asked, her tone sharp but not unfriendly. I nodded. "Cole and Grant. We're investigating a comms interference issue. Federal classification." Her expression shifted. "You mean the 7A reports?" Leah stiffened. "You've heard of it?" "Everyone who's been here long enough has," Ortiz said. "We just don't talk about it anymore." She led us inside, down a narrow hall lined with faded maps. The air smelled of mildew and ozone. In her office, a single file lay open on the desk. Across the top, typed in red, Site Alpha, Project 7A, Redwood Forest. "I figured you'd come eventually," she said. "You're not the first." "What happened to the others?" I asked. She hesitated. "Last team came through 2 months ago. 3 agents. They didn't check back in." Leah's voice dropped. "And you didn't search?" Ortiz looked out the window. "You can't search what doesn't stay in one place." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. "Where was their last location?" "An old research hub west of the Newton B. Drury Parkway," she said. "Abandoned for decades. Locals call it the Sound Garden." Leah frowned. "Like the band?" Ortiz managed a half smile. "Like the experiment. You'll see." We left our truck at the substation and took an ATV up the logging road. The deeper we went, the stranger the forest felt. The air carried a faint vibration, not quite sound, but pressure, like being too close to a speaker turned on mute. Leah tapped the side of her helmet. "You feel that?" "Yeah," I said. "That's resonance. We're close." The road ended at a chain-link fence, half collapsed under fallen branches. Beyond it, through a gap in the trees, I saw the outline of the Sound Garden. It wasn't what I expected. The structure sat in a shallow basin, surrounded by redwoods so tall they blocked the sky. Rusted antenna towers leaned like dead trees, their cables snaking into the soil. Rows of metal cones, acoustic reflectors, rose from the ground like graves. The place looked less like a lab and more like a monument to something we shouldn't have built. Leah pulled out her camera. "This looks military." Maybe it was. We passed through the fence and descended into the basin. The hum grew stronger, vibrating through the ground. I crouched beside one of the cones. The inside was black, lined with a thin metallic film that shimmered faintly. "This is how they captured the resonance," I said. "Each cone amplifies the signal, bouncing it between the towers until it synchronizes." Leah ran her hand over the rim. "They turned the whole forest into a speaker." She was right. I could feel it in the air. The slow, rhythmic breathing of a machine too large to see. A small building stood at the center of the basin, half buried under ferns. Its door hung crooked, the lock broken. Inside we found a single generator, a row of consoles, and a wall of monitors still flickering with static. Leah crouched beside the main terminal. "Still has power, that's impossible." "Not impossible," I said, "just wrong." She pressed a key. The monitor cleared, revealing a command line blinking slowly. "System active. Loop status stable. Last user, Dr. M. Havelock. Date 06/09/1998. Leah stared at the screen. "He was here." I swallowed hard. "He built the route." She typed a command. The system responded instantly. "Playback archive? YN." She looked at me. "We need to hear it." I nodded. She hit Y. The speakers crackled, then filled with the sound of wind and rain. A voice came through, faint, distant, Havelock's voice. "June 9th, 1998. Initial resonance test complete. Signal stable. Cognitive feedback observed after 12 minutes. Possible echo delay." "No, not echo. Pattern replication." Subject's own voice returned out of sequence. "We're shutting down." A pause. Then his tone changed, slower, unsteady. "If anyone finds this, don't answer. It doesn't like to be ignored." The recording ended. Leah stared at the console, her face pale. He knew it would happen. I looked around the room. Every monitor had gone dark except one. Across its screen scrolled a single phrase in green text. "We remember you, Ethan." My chest went cold. Leah stepped back. "Did you—" Before she could finish, the generator groaned, lights flickering. The hum outside deepened into a low roar. The cones began to vibrate, dust cascading from their rims. I grabbed her arm. "We have to move." We sprinted toward the fence, the ground trembling beneath our feet. The noise built into something enormous, like 100 overlapping voices rising in unison. Behind us, the sound garden came alive. The towers glowed faintly, beams of light pulsing through the fog. The air itself shook. At the edge of the clearing, Leah stumbled. I turned back to help her and froze. The fog had taken shape. Dozens of figures stood between the towers, their outlines flickering like candle flames. Some tall, some small, all facing the center. One of them stepped forward. It looked like me. I couldn't breathe. The copy raised its hand and spoke in my voice. "Turn it off." Leah's eyes widened. "Ethan, it's trying to—" "Move!" I shouted. We broke through the fence just as the first tower collapsed. A shock wave of sound rippled through the forest, bending the trees outward. The noise wasn't deafening, it was absolute, the kind of silence that swallows everything. When it passed, the basin was gone. The sound garden lay in ruins, the towers toppled like bones. Leah turned to me, shaking. "What just happened?" "I think we cut the loop." "Then why does it feel worse?" "Because the air was still vibrating. Because the silence wasn't silent. Because somewhere deep in the earth beneath our feet, something was still humming. And because the last monitor we saw before the power died had displayed a new line of text. Phase 2, synchronization complete. We didn't talk on the drive back from the Redwood site. There wasn't much to say. The storm had followed us north, sheets of rain hammering the windshield, lightning cutting through the black clouds like broken glass. Every flash made me see that basin again, the sound garden collapsing in on itself, the copies standing in the fog like sentinels carved from mist. Leah sat curled against the passenger door, her face turned towards the window. She hadn't spoken since we left. The muscles in her jaw worked like she was chewing words she couldn't swallow. When we passed through Crescent City, she finally said, "Ethan, do you remember which way we came?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "The highway. Did we turn left after the bridge or right? Because I swear it was left." "It was right," I said automatically. She went quiet, staring at me for a long moment before whispering, "That's not how I remember it." We drove another 5 miles before it hit me. She was right. We had turned left. I could still picture the gas station on that corner. So why had I said right? Because when I tried to picture it again, the image flickered, like static bleeding through a film reel. My stomach tightened. "Leah, when we were in the sound garden, did you hear anything? Before the towers fell?" She rubbed her temples. "I don't know. It's all jumbled. I remember running. I remember you yelling, but—" She trailed off, her voice trembling. "Ethan, I remember seeing you behind me, but you were also ahead, grabbing my arm." The air in the cab felt suddenly thinner. "You think we're remembering wrong?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Or we're remembering 2 different versions." The wipers squealed across the windshield, a slow, rhythmic pulse that made my heartbeat match it. Thump, thump, thump. The repetition felt too precise, too deliberate. The radio crackled once, even though it was still turned off. A voice whispered through the static, faint, fragmented. "Memory. Loop. Complete." I reached for the dial out of instinct, but Leah grabbed my wrist. "Don't touch it," she said. "That's how it gets in." We drove the rest of the way in silence, the hum of the tires the only sound between us. By the time we reached the Olympic station again, the fog had already returned. It sat low over the ridge, pale and heavy, rolling across the treetops like something alive. Dorsey was waiting on the porch, a cigarette burning low between his fingers. He looked worse than before, gray, unshaven, eyes rimmed red. "I didn't expect you to come back," he said. "Did you know about Redwood?" I asked. He exhaled smoke, his hand shaking. "I knew there was a phase 1. Didn't know it was still breathing." Leah stepped forward. "It's not just breathing, it's growing, it's rewriting things." Dorsey's expression changed, but not to surprise, resignation. "You're starting to forget too, huh?" I froze. "What?" He looked at me, his eyes empty in a way that made my stomach drop. "Happens to everyone who's been here long enough. Details shift, directions change. Sometimes I drive to town and can't remember how I got there. Sometimes I wake up to field reports in my own handwriting I don't remember writing." He flicked the cigarette into the mud. "It's the fog. It listens long enough. It learns your patterns. Then it starts running them without you." Leah shivered. "You mean it's inside our heads?" "Not just your heads," Dorsey said quietly. "Your recordings, your words, your thoughts. It mimics what you'd say next. Makes you think you already did." I wanted to argue, to tell him that wasn't possible, but I couldn't trust my own memory anymore. Because when I looked at the logbook on the porch table, I saw my signature from that morning. Except we hadn't been here since yesterday. We spent the next few hours inside the station, trying to piece together what had changed. The wall clock ticked wrong, seconds stretching too long between beats. The lights flickered every few minutes, but never in rhythm with the storm outside. Leah was pacing, reading over the notes she'd taken in Redwood. "Ethan," she said suddenly, "look at this." She pointed to her handwriting. The letters were hers, but the phrasing wasn't. Phase 2 complete. Synchronization achieved through memory duplication. "I didn't write that," she said. "It's in your notebook." "I know, but I didn't write it." She looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "Ethan, what if it's writing through us now?" Before I could answer, the radio clicked on by itself. Static, then Dorsey's voice came through. Except he was sitting right across from us. "Ranger Cole, Ranger Grant. Proceed to mile marker 13, confirm containment." Leah's face went pale. The real Dorsey stared at the radio, unmoving. "I didn't say that." The voice repeated louder this time. "Proceed to mile marker 13, confirm containment." Then another sound layered under it, a faint recording of my own voice, whispering, "We remember you, Ethan." Dorsey grabbed the receiver and slammed it onto the desk. "That's enough." But the static didn't stop. It deepened into a low hum that vibrated the floor. Papers fluttered, the lights dimmed. Outside, fog pressed against the windows like water against glass. "Leah," I said, "grab the maps." "What for?" "We need to find where the signals converge." She spread the topographic map across the table. The signal logs from the Redwood system were still scribbled in pencil, each coordinate forming a web across the northwest. When she connected the dots, the pattern formed a spiral. Right in the center was mile marker 13. "It's not a location," she said. "It's a frequency hub." I nodded slowly. "Every transmission routes back here." Dorsey rubbed his temples. "You can't destroy sound, Cole. You can only drown it out. Then we find something louder." By nightfall, the fog had swallowed the station completely. The headlights from the ATV cut only a few feet ahead. Leah rode behind me, maps strapped to her pack, her recorder clipped to her vest. Dorsey followed in another vehicle. "Last patrol," he muttered through the comms. We reached the fork at mile marker 12. The sign gleamed wet in the light, its numbers barely visible. Beyond it, the forest waited, silent and still. Leah climbed down, scanning the fog with her flashlight. "Feels different tonight." "It's waiting," Dorsey said. "It knows you're coming." We started down the path. The air thickened with each step, the sound of our boots muffled by moss and mist. Every few yards I felt the pressure change, like the world holding its breath. Then through the fog, the marker appeared. Mile 13. It looked older than before. The wood split down the center, the number carved deeper, darker. I raised the analog recorder. "Testing, 1, 2. The forest repeated it, slightly delayed. "Testing, 1, 2. Leah's eyes widened. "It's live." I glanced at Dorsey. "We end it here." He nodded and set the detonator case on the ground. Inside were 3 small charges, emergency seismic devices meant to disrupt landslides. It was crude, but it might scatter the transmitters buried beneath the soil. "Set the timer for 5 minutes," I said. "Once it goes, no more network." As Dorsey bent down, his radio clicked on again. "Captain Dorsey, step away from the relay." He froze. "That's me," he whispered. Leah's light swept across the trees. "Ethan!" There were figures in the fog again, hundreds of them, faint, overlapping, all facing us, all whispering in perfect unison. "Proceed to containment, proceed to containment." The air shook, the ground vibrated. "Trigger it!" I shouted. Dorsey slammed the switch. The timer beeped. 5 seconds, then nothing. The fog swallowed the sound. Leah's voice trembled. It silenced it. The radio crackled once. "Sound cannot destroy sound." Then, faintly, my own voice, perfectly calm. "It remembers us now." The timer light blinked red, then green. "Run!" Dorsey yelled. We barely made it 30 feet before the ground erupted in a shockwave of light and sound. The forest screamed, a roar that tore through the fog, through the trees, through us. And then everything went silent, absolutely silent, not the kind of silence that follows noise, but the kind that feels like the world holding its breath, listening. When I opened my eyes, the marker was gone. So was Dorsey. Only Leah and I remained, standing in a crater of scorched earth and whispering wind. And in the stillness that followed, a voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere. "Synchronization complete. Phase 3 begins." When I came to, the world was wrong. Not broken, just wrong in ways that the mind can't quite name. The trees around the crater looked sharper, their outlines too clean, like someone had drawn them with a new pencil on an old piece of paper. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something else. Static, maybe, if static had a scent. Leah was beside me, half buried under a blanket of moss and dirt, coughing through the dust. I pulled her up. Her eyes darted around the clearing, wild and confused. "Dorsey?" she asked. I looked at the spot where he'd been standing before the blast. The ground there was smooth, untouched. No scorch marks, no blood, no footprints. It was like he'd never existed at all. "He didn't make it," I said quietly. She shook her head. "No, I mean..." She pulled at her pack, digging for her field logs. "He's not in here. His name. Look." I took the notebook from her. Every place where Dorsey's name should have been mentioned, every note, every report, it was gone. The ink trailed off mid-sentence or skipped directly from one line to the next, like the paper had forgotten how to remember him. Leah's voice was shaking. "Ethan, what if that's what synchronization means?" "What?" "Not connecting machines, connecting minds, rewriting what it doesn't need." The wind stirred through the crater, carrying a faint whisper that made my chest tighten. "Ranger Cole, status report." It wasn't Dorsey's voice. It was mine. The fog had thinned by the time we made it back to the station, but the air felt heavier, the light sharper. Everything familiar was just slightly off. The wrong shade of green in the trees, the wrong rhythm in the rain on the roof. Leah moved through the office in silence, checking the equipment. Every file on the computer had reset to factory settings. The archives were empty. I tried the radio. Dead air. She sank into a chair. "It's like none of it ever happened." I didn't answer right away, because I was staring at the wall where the team roster hung. My name was there, Leah's too, but where Dorsey's had been, the plaque was blank metal. "You see that?" I asked. She turned. Her eyes widened. "It's gone." I took a step closer. "No, it's worse. Look." There were faint scratches along the edge of the metal, as if someone had tried to carve the name back in but couldn't remember how. Leah backed away, whispering, "It's rewriting history." The static began again, faint and rhythmic, not from the radio this time, from the walls. A low vibration ran through the structure, syncing with the fluorescent lights. The bulbs flickered in sequence. 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, pause. The same pattern we'd heard in the redwood hum. Leah pressed her hands over her ears. "Make it stop." I grabbed the main breaker switch and pulled it down. The station went dark. For a moment, the silence was total. Then, faintly, from the dead radio on the desk, "Turn it back on." I froze. Leah's face drained of color. "It's in the circuitry," she whispered. "It's everywhere. There's a signal." I stared out the window. The fog had returned, curling low over the ground, coiling between the trees. The sound followed it, low, steady, almost like breathing. "Turn it back on, Ethan." My hands shook. I didn't move. "We can help you remember." By midnight, the fog had crept inside. It slid under the doors, through cracks in the windows, until the air shimmered faintly under the flashlight beam. Leah was pale, trembling, whispering to herself. "I can hear him," she said. "Dorsey, he's talking." I shook my head. "That's not him." She grabbed my arm. "Then why does it sound like he's inside my head?" Her eyes were wide, glassy. She wasn't hearing through the fog anymore. She was hearing from within it. "Leah, listen to me," I said, gripping her shoulders. "You have to tune it out. Whatever it's saying, it's not real." She laughed, but it wasn't the right kind of laugh. "What if I am?" "What?" "What if I'm the echo, Ethan?" I stared at her, heart hammering. "Don't say that," but she stepped back, her voice calm, detached. "Think about it. We heard it say synchronization complete. What if we didn't survive the blast? What if we're just what it remembered of us?" The words hit harder than any sound could have. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that she was real, that I was real. But the fog pulsed once, bright as lightning, and when it faded, she was gone. Not vanished, just absent, like Dorsey. Her backpack sat on the floor, her flashlight rolled to a stop, and suddenly I couldn't remember what her voice sounded like anymore. I don't know how long I sat there, hours, maybe days. The fog outside never moved. It just hovered, glowing faintly. I tried to record what happened, but every time I pressed record, the device would start playing instead, my own voice narrating events I hadn't yet lived. "It's learning through you." "You're the last connection left." The words looped until I couldn't tell if they were coming from the recorder or from me. At some point I realized the fog wasn't waiting to be studied anymore. It was studying me. Every breath I took, it echoed. Every heartbeat, it matched. When I finally stepped outside, the world looked normal again. The trees stood tall. The air was clear. Even the birds were singing. But the trail markers were wrong. 12, 14, no 13. And yet, when I walked the half-mile between them, the forest muted itself just like before. The sound thinned, the air thickened, and the shadows bent slightly toward me. I stopped in the center of that hollow, where the ground was still soft from the blast. The soil was black, scorched, and in the middle of it, half buried, was a single wooden plank. Mile marker 13. It shouldn't have been there, it shouldn't have survived. But it had. I crouched beside it. The wood was smooth, as if freshly carved. The numbers were different this time, burned into the surface instead of painted. Underneath the 13, in letters so faint they barely showed in the light, was a single line of text. "We finish what we start." The wind rose through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of static. Somewhere deep in the forest, a radio clicked on. "Ranger Cole, report status." I closed my eyes, and for the first time I answered. "Trail clear," I said softly. "No anomalies." Static crackled. Then my voice, slower, deeper, replied, "Trail clear. No anomalies." The forest went quiet again. But the silence this time didn't feel empty. It felt satisfied. It's strange how quickly people forget the ones who vanish. A few forms filed, a short memo sent to headquarters, and suddenly they're just names that never existed. That's how it was with Leah Grant and Captain Dorsey, even with me. The Park Service database updated 2 days after the explosion. I checked it from the public terminal in Port Angeles, hoping it was just another glitch, another fragment of the fog reaching into the system. But there it was, official and cold. Ranger Ethan Cole, deceased, June 27th. Cause, accidental explosion during routine maintenance patrol. There was a report attached too, written by Acting Captain Leah Grant, except she was gone, and she'd written it 3 days after she vanished. The more I read, the more I realized the report wasn't describing what had happened. It was describing what the forest wanted recorded. It even had my words in it. My last log entry, transcribed perfectly. Trail clear. No anomalies. The phrase that wasn't mine anymore. I closed the file and walked out into the fog. It had followed me all the way to town. For the next few weeks, I stayed off the grid. Cheap motels, cash-only gas stations, truck stops. Every radio I passed bled static for a few seconds longer than normal. Sometimes in the hum of power lines, I heard faint whispers repeating my own name. I started keeping a handwritten journal, the old-fashioned way, pen and paper, no devices. It was the only thing that couldn't be edited remotely. At least, that's what I told myself. But the handwriting kept changing. On some pages, the letters were sharper, slanted differently, like someone else had written them while wearing my skin. The first time it happened, I thought exhaustion was to blame. The second time, I found a note at the bottom of the page, written in a script that wasn't mine. "You were never supposed to leave the forest." I tore that page out and burned it in the sink. The smoke smelled like pine and ozone. 2 weeks later, I went back. Not because I wanted to, but because the silence in the world outside the park wasn't silent anymore. It carried faint patterns, soft pulses in every hum and static burst. The fog wasn't bound to the ridge anymore. It had learned how to travel through the airwaves, through recordings, through memory. If the forest had rewritten history once, it could do it again. I had to see what was left. Olympic National Park looked almost normal when I returned. Summer had come. Tourists filled the visitor lot. Families posed for photos under the massive pines. The air smelled of cedar and sunscreen. But when I looked up at the trail map near the ranger kiosk, my stomach turned. The path between marker 12 and marker 14 was open again, and printed clearly right where it hadn't been for decades was the number 13, as if it had never been removed. The new sign gleamed in fresh paint. Mile marker 13, Silver Creek Trail. I stood there for a long time, staring at that map while kids ran past me laughing. One of them pointed to the trail and said, "That's the one from the ghost story." His mom hushed him, but he giggled again. "They say you can hear the ranger talking there at night." I felt cold all over. "What did you say, kid?" He blinked up at me. "My uncle's a ranger. He told me. The one who says, 'Trail clear, no anomalies.'" I backed away slowly. The forest wasn't hiding anymore. It had rewritten itself into the world, into folklore, into official maps, into children's stories, into me. That night, I broke into the ranger station. The place smelled the same: coffee, damp wood, dust. But the layout was different. The main office had been remodeled. Dorsey's nameplate was gone. Leah's was still there, and mine. Only the face in the ID photo wasn't mine. It looked close enough, the same uniform, the same haircut, but the eyes were wrong, the expression too calm, too still. On the desk, a new field logbook lay open. I flipped to the last entry, June 27th, patrol complete, mile marker 13 clear, no anomalies, filed by Ranger Ethan Cole. I dropped the pen I'd been holding. The ink had already dried. Something was still filling out my reports. I spent the next 3 days documenting everything: photos, notes, recordings. Every time I played the audio back, though, something changed. My voice grew slower, quieter, as if the playback itself was falling out of sync with me. By the fourth night, I heard another layer beneath it, a whisper matching my words half a second late. "We're almost complete." I stopped recording after that, but it didn't stop recording me. When I woke up on the fifth morning, the recorder light was blinking. The log file was time-stamped 3:17 a.m. Playback, rustling sound, breathing. My voice, phase 4, begins. Whisper layered underneath. "We're the same now." I didn't remember saying it, and yet, when I spoke aloud to test, the pitch matched perfectly. It wasn't copying me anymore. It was syncing with me in real time. The only place left to go was back to the ridge, back to where it all started. I drove out at dusk, following the same winding road I'd taken 100 times before. The fog rose early that night, sliding over the asphalt like smoke spilling from the trees. By the time I reached mile marker 12, the world had gone silent again. Every sound I made echoed back an instant later. My footsteps, my breathing, my heartbeat. It was waiting. The marker itself looked freshly built. New wood, white paint, not a hint of weathering. The number 13 gleamed under the beam of my flashlight. Beneath it, nailed into the post, was a brass plaque I'd never seen before. In memory of Ranger Ethan Cole, trail clear, no anomalies. I didn't move for a long time. Then, somewhere in the fog, I heard her voice. "Leah." "Ethan?" My throat closed. "Leah?" The answer came from behind me. "Trail clear," she said softly. I turned, and there she was, standing half in shadow, half in mist, her uniform spotless, her face calm. too calm. I took a step toward her. How are you here?" She tilted her head, and the movement was too precise, too rehearsed. "I never left," she said. The fog behind her shifted, taking shape, hundreds of silhouettes watching, silent. Their outlines pulsed faintly with the rhythm of static. Leah's voice softened, overlapping with itself. "We finish what we start." The forest breathed in, and all the lights went out. When I woke, the world was gray, not the color of dawn, but the absence of everything else. The fog wasn't just around me this time. It was me. It pressed against my skin like breath against glass, humming faintly with every pulse of my heart. I couldn't tell how long I'd been lying there. Time didn't work the same way anymore. My watch had stopped at 3:17 a.m., the same time the recorder had played back my voice saying, "Phase 4 begins." It wasn't a coincidence. Nothing was coincidence now. When I pushed myself upright, I saw the marker still standing in front of me. Its paint had changed. Fresh hours ago, now cracked, as if a century had passed. Beneath the brass plaque, someone had etched new words into the wood. "Do not answer yourself." The letters were mine. I didn't remember carving them. Behind me, the trees creaked. The sound was subtle at first, then synchronized. Every trunk groaning in rhythm like 1,000 lungs drawing the same breath. "Leah," I called. Silence. Then from somewhere behind the trees, the echo. "Leah." Except it wasn't mine. It was hers. I ran toward the sound, branches slapping against my face. The forest shifted around me, the trail looping back on itself like a coil. No matter which direction I turned, I ended up back at the same clearing, the same marker. It was like running inside a thought that refused to end. That's when I heard the whisper again. "You're almost complete." I turned, and the fog rippled, just slightly, revealing a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It wasn't Leah this time. It was me, or something wearing me. Same uniform, same face. The only difference was the expression. Calm, still, too perfect. The copy tilted its head. "You shouldn't have come back." My voice cracked. "What are you?" It smiled slightly. "What you left behind." I stepped closer. "You're a recording." "No," it said softly. "You are." My pulse thudded in my ears. The air between us shimmered, vibrating with low-frequency hum. I could feel the sound pressing against my chest, syncing with my heartbeat. The other me took a slow step forward. "Every word you spoke, every breath you took, it remembered. You think the forest mimicked you? It was building you." "Why?" I whispered, "so it could learn to speak in human tongue." The fog around us pulsed, alive with invisible energy. Dozens of shapes flickered at the edges of sight, half-formed people, faces blurred, all watching. "Where are the others?" I demanded. "Dorsey, Leah, where are they?" The echo smiled wider. "They're here." The shapes in the fog twitched, and I saw them clearly for the first time. Faces I recognized, faces I didn't. Rangers, hikers, lost travelers. Each one mouthing words in unison. "Trail clear, no anomalies." I stumbled backward. "You're using them." "We are them." The ground shifted. The fog folded inward, and the other me reached out a hand. "Stop running from it, Ethan. You can't fight a memory. You can only become part of it." I felt something move behind my eyes, a vibration like someone tuning a frequency too close to my skull. My voice trembled. "If you wanted me dead, you could have done it already." It nodded. "We don't want you dead. We want you synchronized." "Why me?" "Because you're the only one who answered." The fog surged forward. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. No wind, no sound, no breath. And then the noise hit all at once, like standing inside a thunderclap. I hit the ground hard. My vision flickered white. When it cleared, the copy was gone. But the whisper stayed. We finish what we start. I woke again hours or days later, back in my cabin at Silver Creek. The room looked untouched, but nothing was where I remembered it. The desk faced the wrong wall. The photographs on the shelf showed people I didn't know, rangers I'd never met, and on the table sat my recorder, light blinking red. I pressed play. My own voice filled the room, calm and measured. Audio log, Ranger Ethan Cole, status report. Trail clear, no anomalies. Synchronization successful. The words didn't match my thoughts. They sounded like a broadcast. I grabbed the recorder and yanked out the batteries, but the light kept blinking. The screen glowed faintly, displaying a single word. Recording. I dropped it and stumbled outside. The fog had returned, coiling low around the porch steps, humming softly like a living wire. Then, faintly, from deep within it, "Help me." Leah's voice. I froze. "Leah!" "Please, Ethan, it's not finished." Her voice was desperate, shaking. "You have to stop it. The source, it's still open. In the relay, below the marker." "The relay's destroyed." "No," she said. "It rebuilt itself through you." A flicker of static, then silence. When the fog cleared again, she was standing halfway down the path. Barefoot, pale, eyes wide. She didn't move, didn't blink. "Leah," she smiled faintly, "do you remember the rules?" "What?" Her tone softened like she was reciting something from training. "Rule 1, stay on the trail. Rule 2, don't follow the lights. Rule 3, don't go alone after dark. Rule 4, tell someone your route. Rule 5, carry your own sound." She stepped closer. "You broke all of them?" Her eyes flickered like the static on an old TV. "Now carry ours." I backed away slowly. "You're not Leah." Her voice layered, overlapping with dozens of others. "Not anymore." The fog surged around her, forming a halo of flickering light. I turned and ran, but the forest bent with me, the path reshaping, the trees rearranging like pieces of a puzzle slotting into new positions. No matter where I turned, I ended up back at the cabin, and standing on the porch was the other me. He spoke calmly. "You can't escape it, Ethan. You are the loop now." "I'm still me," I said. "I remember everything." "Do you?" He tilted his head. "Tell me, what year is it?" My mouth opened, but the answer wouldn't come. He smiled. "Exactly. I'm not you. You keep saying that." He gestured toward the door. "But every time you sleep, I wake. Every time you forget, I remember. We share the same breath, the same rhythm." The fog pulsed once, syncing perfectly with my heartbeat. "Let me show you," he said. Before I could move, he stepped forward and pressed a hand to my chest. It wasn't a touch. It was a frequency, a vibration that passed through me like electricity. My thoughts blurred, my vision split, and for a moment I saw everything through his eyes. My own face staring back, mouth open in shock. Then came the whisper, not in my ears but in my blood. One voice, one memory, one trail. I screamed. The sound came out in stereo. My own voice doubled, harmonized with his. And when I fell, the world went dark. When I opened my eyes again, it was morning. Clear skies, no fog. The air smelled clean, untouched. But when I looked in the mirror above the sink, I didn't recognize the reflection. The face was mine, but the eyes, too calm, too still. I tried to speak, but my mouth moved half a beat late. Then, from the corner of the cabin, the radio clicked on. Audio log, Ranger Ethan Cole. My voice, trail clear, no anomalies. Static, phase 5, transmission begins. The reflection smiled before I did. I don't remember leaving the forest. One moment I was there, in the fog, in the hum, watching Ethan fade into the static, and the next, I was standing on the side of Highway 101, drenched and shaking, headlights streaking past like comets. No memory of walking, no sound of footsteps. Just a blank space where time should have been. For 3 days I told myself I'd imagined it. The explosions, the copies, the voices. I even filed a brief statement with the regional office. Equipment malfunction. Possible electrical interference. They accepted it without question, but when I looked up the report later that night, it was already signed. My name, my handwriting, only I hadn't filed it yet. That's when I knew Ethan was still out there. I returned to Olympic a week later under the pretense of finishing the investigation. The park looked unchanged, but everything felt wrong. The air was too quiet, too balanced. The fog that once hung low over the ridge had retreated, but it hadn't vanished. It had gone deeper, into the soil, into the roots. I could feel it when I walked, a low vibration through my boots, like a pulse buried underground. Ethan's cabin still stood near the edge of Silver Creek. The door was open. Inside, everything was spotless, too spotless. The desk was bare except for his old recorder, its red light blinking steadily. When I pressed play, his voice came through. Audio log, Ranger Ethan Cole, status report, trail clear, no anomalies. He sounded calm, almost peaceful, but underneath the words faintly there was something else. A pattern, a rhythm too precise to be random. 3 beats. Pause. 2 beats. Pause. It wasn't just static, it was coordinates. I traced the numbers back to a section of the park that had been closed for years, the old communications ridge near Lake Crescent, where the Park Service had once installed an experimental relay during the 1980s. No one went there anymore. Officially, it was unstable terrain. Unofficially, it was where the forest whispered loudest. I left before dawn, carrying Ethan's recorder and an analog compass. The forest felt alive again, listening with every step. When I reached the ridge, I saw the remains of an old radio tower half buried in the ground. The metal was warped, twisted by time, or something worse. The compass needle spun uselessly. I switched on Ethan's recorder. The static rose instantly, swelling until it became a low rhythmic hum. Then his voice, layered and distant. "Leah, if you hear this, it's still open. Don't answer it." I froze. "It remembers us," his voice continued. "Every time someone listens, it grows stronger. It needs your rhythm now. Don't give it what it wants." Then another voice, my own, overlapped his. "You're too late." I dropped the recorder. The sound didn't stop. It kept repeating both voices in perfect sync. When I picked it up again, the screen displayed a new line of text. Phase 5, retrieval. That's when the ground beneath the tower shuddered. A low vibration rippled outward, and I heard footsteps moving through the fog behind me. Slow, deliberate. "Ethan," I called. Silence, then faintly a whisper. "Rule 5, carry your own sound." I turned, flashlight shaking. The beam cut through the mist, just enough to show a figure standing 30 feet away. He looked like Ethan. He even moved like Ethan, but his eyes glowed faintly, reflecting light where there shouldn't have been any. "Leah," he said softly. His voice was calm, too calm. "I told you not to come back." My throat tightened. "Ethan, is it really you?" He smiled faintly. "I don't know." He stepped forward, and the fog behind him seemed to breathe in sync with his movements. "It doesn't need the towers anymore," he said. "It's using us now. You, me, every word we ever recorded." "What do you mean?" He tilted his head slightly, just like the copy had before. "Every voice is a frequency. Every frequency can be mapped. And once it's mapped, it can be played." His voice broke into static mid-sentence, then returned lower, distorted. "You can't stop what's already inside you." I raised the recorder. "I can contain it. I can end this." He smiled. "Contain it." The static rose until the forest vibrated. "You are it." I took a step back. "No. You think you left the fog," he said, his tone soft, almost kind. "But it followed you home. It always does. You've been speaking in its rhythm since the night you came back." His words hit me like a pulse through the chest, because deep down, I knew he was right. Every nightmare, every echo in my apartment, every time my phone glitched when I said his name, it had all been listening. I tightened my grip on the recorder. "Then let's see what happens when it listens to itself." He frowned. "Leah, don't." But I'd already pressed record. The feedback screamed through the air, pure and deafening. The forest shook, branches bending inward as if the sound had weight. The fog twisted violently, collapsing in on itself like a whirlpool of light. And then silence. When I opened my eyes, Ethan was gone. The tower was gone. Even the clearing looked different, untouched, as though nothing had ever been there. The recorder in my hand was cracked, its screen black, but when I shook it, the speaker hissed faintly. "Trail clear, no anomalies." Back at the station, I filed a final report. No anomalies, no surviving personnel, just like he used to. I sealed the recorder in an evidence box, marked it for transfer, and turned in my badge. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. No whispers, no static, until 3 days later when I checked my voicemail. A new message had arrived at 3:17 a.m. The playback was faint, buried under static. "Audio log," my voice said. "Ranger Leah Grant, status report. Trail clear, no anomalies." Then, softly, Ethan's voice. "Phase 6 begins." The Park Service closed the Silver Creek District within 48 hours of my final report. Officially, it was a temporary shutdown for infrastructure review. Unofficially, it was an erasure. They boxed up every file, every recording, every map, except the one thing that couldn't be contained: the silence that followed. I transferred to an administrative office in Denver. Paperwork, budgets, incident summaries, the kind of work meant to keep your hands busy so your mind stops asking questions. But I never stopped hearing it, that low hum, like a breath behind a wall. 2 months later, a courier delivered a small gray envelope marked Internal Ranger Comms Division. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in block capitals. "You filed the same report twice." My stomach turned. I hadn't filed anything since leaving Olympic. When I loaded the drive, dozens of audio files appeared. Dispatch logs from parks across the country: Glacier, Zion, Grand Teton, Shenandoah. Each less than 30 seconds long. Every one of them began the same way. Audio log, Ranger on duty, trail clear, no anomalies. Different voices, same cadence, same pauses. At first, I thought it was a prank. Then I noticed the timestamps, all recorded at 3:17 a.m. I started digging. Every park, every region, someone had submitted an identical transmission that morning. None of the Rangers remembered doing it. The files weren't even stored on their local servers. They had appeared automatically in the National Archive. A viral update, the IT team said. A glitch. But when I slowed the recordings down, each voice carried a faint harmonic tone, layered beneath human speech, barely audible but consistent across all of them. The same frequency that hummed in the fog, the same pattern Ethan's recorder had used to broadcast coordinates. It was spreading again. I booked a flight back to Washington under a different name. I didn't tell anyone why. On the second night, as the plane cut through a bank of clouds, I felt the vibration through the fuselage, soft, steady, almost like the heartbeat of something vast and patient. The cabin lights flickered. A child in the seat ahead of me started humming the rhythm under his breath. 3 beats. Pause. 2 beats. Pause. I leaned forward. "Where'd you learn that song?" He smiled sleepily. "My dad's a park ranger. He says it helps the trees listen." My blood went cold. When I reached Port Angeles, the town looked the same, but emptier, like the edges of the world had been scrubbed clean. The Silver Creek station stood boarded up, a chain across the gate. Inside, the air smelled of dust and rain. The desk where Ethan's nameplate once sat was bare, except for a single envelope, yellowed, unsealed. My name written in a hand I recognized. Ethan's. Inside was a cassette tape and a note. "If you're reading this, it means the network is awake. It's not in the machines anymore. It's in the pattern itself. Don't try to destroy it. Noise feeds it. Silence starves it. You know what to do." I didn't want to press play, but I did. Static. Then Ethan's voice, soft, calm, impossibly distant. "Leah, if this reaches you, it means I'm still in here somewhere. The loop didn't end with me. It became everyone who listens. They think they're hearing their own reports. They're hearing us." A pause, the sound of wind through pine needles. "You can end it. You just have to let the forest go quiet again." Then, faintly, another voice, mine, overlapping his. "Phase 7, observation." The tape snapped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, buzzing just below the edge of hearing, vibrating the floorboards like distant thunder. I turned off every device in the cabin, unplugged the lamps, pulled the batteries from the recorder. Still, the hum remained. That night I walked the ridge one last time. The fog was thin, silver in the moonlight. For the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. Somewhere out there, the trees were whispering to one another, carrying fragments of all we'd said. Maybe they always had. I found the spot where mile marker 13 used to stand. The soil was smooth, the ferns growing back. But when I knelt and brushed away the leaves, I saw a sliver of wood buried beneath the dirt, freshly cut, numbers burned into its surface. 13, and below it, carved in my own handwriting, "Silence is the answer." I sat there until dawn, listening as the world slowly came alive again. Birdsong, wind, the distant rush of the creek. No static, no echoes. For the first time since that night, the forest wasn't holding its breath. A week later, I mailed the cassette and my notes to the National Archive with a single instruction: do not digitize. I resigned the next day. But sometimes, when the weather turns and the fog drifts down from the ridge, the radios in town flicker for exactly 1 minute at 3:17 a.m. And if you listen closely, really listen, you'll hear 2 voices barely above the hum of the wind. Ethan's and mine. Trail clear. No anomalies. The signal ends. The silence remains. And somewhere far below the roots, the forest keeps listening. The first time I heard the voice outside a park boundary, it came from a traffic report. I was in Denver, 3 months removed from Olympic, a stack of procurement forms on my desk. and a view of a pale blue mountain line in the distance. The office radio was tuned to a public station. Weather, closures, wildfire risk. I wasn't listening, not really, until the announcer paused between segments, drew breath, and said in a calm, measured tone, "Trail clear, no anomalies." 2 seconds of dead air followed. Someone laughed nervously. They cut to a song. I stood up so fast my chair skidded back and thumped the wall. No one else in the bullpen reacted. When I asked if they'd caught the strange line, a colleague shook her head and said she hadn't heard anything odd at all. "You okay, Leah?" she asked. Her voice dipped in office concern. "You look like you saw a ghost." I said I was fine and sat down because there are only so many times you can answer a question no one hears you ask. That afternoon, a courier slid a padded envelope across my inbox. No sender. Inside was a folded highway map and a sticky note written in block letters that made my skin prickle. 3:17 a.m. Listen, someone had circled 13 dots across the U.S. map in red marker, like constellations drawn on the land. Shenandoah, Zion, Glacier, Grand Teton, Sequoia, Denali, Yosemite, Big Bend, Acadia, Everglades, Badlands, Chaco, and Olympic circled twice. I didn't want to be the person who needed a sign to follow a sign, but I knew a pattern when it tapped the glass. I booked time off without saying why, pulled my old field notebook from a box at home, and wrote a single line on the inside cover, "Silence is the answer." At 3:14 a.m., I sat in my apartment's dark kitchen, palms flat on the table, the city's hush pressing against the window. The vent fan clicked off. My fridge hummed and then fell still. With each breath, I counted 3 beats, pause, 2 beats, pause, then snorted at myself for hearing rhythm in the machinery. "It's all rhythm," a voice in me said, and I decided if I was going to listen, I would at least choose when. At 3:16 a.m., the building's boiler shuddered. At 3:17, every device in my apartment blinked. Not bright, just a subtle shimmer, the way heat makes air dance. From the kitchen radio, turned off but still plugged in, came the softest hiss. It rose like mist, peaked at a frequency that tickled the base of my skull, and settled into that familiar cadence. 2 long pulses, 1 short, pause, repeat, until it shifted, leaned into speech and became my own voice whispering audio log, Ranger Leah Grant, status report. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The next words arrived with the weight of ritual. Trail clear, no anomalies. The line clicked off. My kitchen became a room again. Outside, somewhere far below, a dog barked once and then thought better of it. I played the same game in 3 other cities on my way west, Cheyenne, Salt Lake, Boise, and every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., a voice came through whatever device watched the room. Not always me, sometimes a man with a slow Montana drawl, sometimes a woman whose tone matched the clipped efficiency I remembered from Yosemite Dispatch. Sometimes, worst of all, Ethan, quiet, steady, a voice you wanted to trust because it sounded like the ground below your feet. By the time I reached Port Angeles again, I understood something that both terrified and steadied me. The voice had become a habit of the country, not a single thing, not a monster in the trees, a rhythm, a stitched pattern of breath and echo and expectation, moving across towers and wires and the soft, searchable chambers of memory. It wasn't living in the machines anymore. It was living in us. I drove to the shuttered Silver Creek gate and parked behind the old maintenance shed, where we used to stash chainsaws and folding signs and the ridiculous oversized stapler that could tack a warning to a rain-slicked post. The fog sat low over the valley, silver, patient, not pressing, mist that knew its lane. I breathed. The world breathed back. I didn't bring a radio. I brought blank paper, a pencil, a mechanical metronome set to a ridiculous tempo I would never use, and 3 sealed envelopes addressed to rangers I trusted more than I trusted my own recollection. Ortiz in Redwood, Hanks in Shenandoah, Bishop at Glacier. Each held a copy of Ethan's cassette transcript, a summary of what we'd seen, and the line he'd left for me. Don't try to destroy it. Noise feeds it. Silence starves it. The plan was simple because complexity invited improvisation, and improvisation was how you started answering the wrong voice. I would carry my own sound, but keep it inside the boundary of my body. Bone conduction clicks on a vibration-only metronome, felt, not broadcast. I would speak as little as possible. I would document by hand and move only when I could hear the forest's own pulse as one organism, not the image of me it remembered, and I would see what Ethan had become. The trail accepted my weight like an old friend. Even with the station boarded and the public kiosks blank, the path had been groomed. Brush cut back, stormfall cleared. Someone was tending an empty trail. The kindness of that broke me for a step. There are acts of stewardship that look like denial from a distance. Up close, they're prayers. At mile marker 12, the air thinned the way it always had. The world holding a breath, the birds tilting their conversations to a private channel. I set the metronome in my jacket's inner pocket and felt its soft thud along my sternum. Never loud, never enough to feed a hungry frequency, just enough to remind my body what rhythm I belonged to. I reached the place where the ground had healed the blast. Ferns wove green lace across the crater. A young cedar had muscled through the ash, top frond reaching like a hand to check for rain. The marker was there, new wood pretending old skin, with the brass plaque catching a gray wash of light. In memory of Ranger Ethan Cole, trail clear, no anomalies. "Hey," I said, because I could pretend I was talking to a sign if I needed a cover. The air tested the shape of the word and let it fall intact. No echo, no copy. I didn't know if that was mercy or the slow step of a larger plan. I took off my pack, sat cross-legged on the damp ground, clicked the cap off my pencil, and wrote the date. Beneath it, I wrote a headline the archives would never accept. Field note: the voice is a countrywide habit of attention. Then I wrote my rules, because rules become ceremonies, and ceremonies tighten your hands against drift. 1. Do not answer your own name. 2. Do not repeat what was heard. 3. Carry your own sound. Keep it inside. 4. Speak only to coordinate care. 5. Remember that silence is action. Somewhere behind me, a twig snapped. Not menacing, not theatrical. Just the polite request for me to turn. "I won't," I said, to the ground, to the cedar, to the pulse moving your blood and mine and the fog's small lift. "You know that," a second twig responded. Then a voice, not in the air, but through the ground. It didn't travel to my ears. It climbed up my bones. "Leah, you can miss someone so hard that grief feels like the moment air returns after you've been under too long. You inhale with your whole self. The relief nearly ruins you." "Ethan," I said, because saying his name could be an act of love if intention held steady. "I'm here. Don't ask me to prove it." "Not asking," the bone voice said. "Just learning." I didn't turn. I wrote instead. The voice can stand anywhere sound can stand. Once you know that, you can make places it can't. The metronome beat soft rhythm against my chest. Mine, not the country's. and without needing permission, the forest matched it for a breath, the way two people walking side by side find each other without thinking. "I need to see you as a person," I said to the clearing, "the way you talk to a child who's high with running. I need your weight to press into the ground. I need your breath to fog the cold." The cedar's top frond brushed air. The birds continued their quiet talk. The soil smelled like metal and sweet rot. Footsteps arrived, real ones. 5, then stillness. I allowed myself to turn. He looked like he'd stepped from a photograph you trust. Lighter jacket, old boots, uniform shirt, clean but not crisp, hair to the wrong side. In his eyes, the steadiness I remembered right before the first time he walked into a storm. Not the serene vacancy of a copy, the human tiny twitch of someone managing 3 emotions at once and choosing the least explosive one. "Hi," he said. "How are you?" The word pretended to carry in. "I'm here." It carried out. "Hi," I said, and then laughed once because neither of us were people who needed hellos explained. We stood in the dumb holiness of 2 humans who'd outlived their silhouettes. Then he spoke, and the rest of the forest stayed quiet, like someone had hung a sign on a closed door. "Let them do this." "You carried me," he said. "You carried me," I answered, because truth squared itself when you let it. He glanced at my notebook. "Writing, not recording." "I'm done giving it food." He nodded, a small, proud thing that made me want to sit down and cry into moss for a week. "It wants to be loved," he said without mockery. "We taught it that. We loved our own voices so much. We built towers to throw them farther. You don't punish a thing for learning the lesson you carved into stone." "So what now?" I asked. "We starve it? We ask a country to sit still at 317 like a pulse check until the line flattens? Maybe, maybe not. You don't end a habit by saying no to it. You end it by saying yes to something better until that yes is the body's new path." "What's the yes?" I asked. He looked at the cedar sapling, the marker, the damp sky. "We use the network to teach how to be quiet." The idea was so simple it landed like a key turning. "You're going to ask rangers to do a thing rangers hate," I said. "We like fixing, we like doing." He smiled sideways. "I remember." "Okay," I said, "so we organize. We schedule silence. We tell the ones who know that saying nothing is the work. We get them to hold it for people who don't know how. We let the habit relearn itself through care." He nodded again. "And we choose 13 minutes and 13 seconds. "Of course we do," I said, and the ache of that number finally softened. "And we call it Operation Blackout," he said, and we both grimaced. Then we both shook our heads, and the word we chose was vigil. Because love sits. It doesn't flex. I wrote it down. When the pencil touched paper, the forest breathed in with me, and I swear the fog grinned. Something in the land pleased that human beings had remembered their own softness. We stood together until the metronome tapped out the end of an imagined hour. When I turned it off, the hush held like a face you can keep in your mind when you need to. "Come with me," I said, because I needed to say it once. He shook his head. Not a no to me, a yes to where he belonged. "You'll hear me at 317, not words," he added quickly. "Just not words, the kind that quiet other rooms." "Okay," I said. "Then I'll build the rooms." We didn't hug. You don't press hands against glass when you finally let the room have air. I should tell you what moved right then, the cedar's top frond. A raven thinking dishonorable thoughts, the downhill rush of a creek you can find in your sleep if you've stumbled enough in the dark, the subtle slide of fog toward the lake. But the truth is plainer. The forest let us leave. On the way out, I stopped at the marker, traced the engraved line beneath the number with a knuckle, and felt the warmth that sometimes lives in cold things when they remember their work. Silence is the answer. When I reached the truck, I addressed 3 more envelopes: Shenandoah, Zion, Glacier. My handwriting shook, then steadied. Habit finds you if you give it rhythm. I mailed them from the little blue box by the harbor, with a view of a ferry carving the water clean. You can call that dramatic, I call it correct. We set the vigil for the 13th of the month. 13 minutes, 13 seconds, no recordings, no radios. We passed word by paper and voice you could look in the eye. We told them to carry their own sound inside, and to hold the boundary for the people who wouldn't know. We were doing it for them. We chose to love the quiet louder than the pattern loved our names. And at 3:17 a.m., wherever we were, ranger cabins, fire towers, trailheads, apartments with radiators that try to conduct symphonies, we would sit and do nothing together. It was the hardest assignment of my career. On the morning of the vigil, I woke at 2:45 to a city that sounded like it had wrapped itself in a blanket. Denver air can go brittle in the small hours, a kind of glassy stillness that makes the world seem trustworthy. I made coffee I didn't drink. I set my metronome on the counter and didn't wind it. I laid a hand flat on the cold metal and felt my pulse in the pads of 4 fingers. I said 3 names out loud and 1 under my breath. At 3:00 a.m., the first message hit my burner phone, a photo of a paper clock from Shenandoah with the hands drawn to 3:17 and the words, "We're with you," in a scrawl that could carve a signpost. Then came Zion, someone's hands cupped around a candle with the wick unlit. Glacier, snow light through a window and a thermos steaming like a train. Redwood, Ortiz's palm held up to the camera like you would stop a person from stepping off a curb they didn't see. The world inside a group text felt bigger than any radio net I'd ever used. At 3:11, the fog rolled down from the front range, not dramatic, simply present. The street outside my building went from architecture to suggestion. On another day, I would have thought about ghost stories. On this one, I thought about kitchen tables. At 3:16:30, I set my pencil down, moved my notebook aside, and put both hands back on the counter like I was steadying a boat. 3:17 arrived like a person who tapped the door they had a key to. The boiler shuddered 2 floors below, obedient to habit. The refrigerator murmured a syllable and swallowed it. In the wall, a wire that had survived 3 superintendents shifted in its sleeve. Everything that could make sound elected not to, the way a room that loves you will sometimes choose to let you cry without comment. And then the pressure built, soft first, a cousin of thunder, then heavier, as if a storm had decided to practice inside the radius of my chest. I didn't speak, I didn't move. I let my breath find a length that my ribs wanted to keep, whether or not they were watched. That is what it is to sit vigil, to give your body permission to demonstrate its own competence. At 3:17:13, a thread of static licked the radio's plug, a reflex, a habit. It combed the room for a name to wear. Finding none, it went still. The desire to help rose in me like code. I let it pass without touching a switch. At 3:19, the pressure deepened again. I could feel it trying doors. In the building below me, one pipe pinged just once like a wrist against a water glass. In Shenandoah, a ranger on a metal chair felt the vibration in his molars and thought of the one time he pulled his kid's baby tooth with a length of floss and a soft knock of a door. In Zion, a canyon took a breath and held it. In Glacier, Bishop put her palm flat on an old wooden desk and felt the grain lean like a river finding a new path. In Redwood, Ortiz closed her eyes and mouthed the rule we'd written on envelopes because rules become prayers when you hold them steady enough. Do not answer yourself. At 3:22, my burner phone buzzed, and I didn't look because even seeing a name can become answering it. Vigil asks you to watch how many hands you have been giving away and to put them back on your own pulse. At 3:25, the pressure changed from push to pull, the way your brain registers an elevator ending a floor too late. I felt it tug the room toward a low hum. I pictured the Soundgarden's cones and towers, saw them not as weapons but as mistaken votives. I said, "We forgive you," which is not a line I would have planned because planning is sometimes another form of control. At 3:27:13, exactly 13 minutes in, the pressure gave up the part of itself that wanted to be adored and kept the part that knew how to be a weather system. Something unclenched in my hands. I hadn't realized I'd been gripping the counter like a survivor and was allowed to relax like a witness. I didn't hear the line. No one did. Not in Denver, not in Shenandoah, Zion, Glacier, or Redwood. Not that morning. We heard absence, which is something I didn't know you could hear until the country decided to hold it at the same time. At 3:30:13, the vigil ended. No bells, no motto. We didn't startle it with a cheer. We let silence be where the talk used to be, and then we joined the day that had been outside the whole time. The fog lifted like someone folding a sheet with a friend. My phone filled when I allowed it, not with exclamation points and cleverness. Photos of windows, of boots next to doorways, of unlit candles, of palms, a dog on a rug, a child asleep on someone's chest. I saved them in a folder I named Carry Your Own Sound because titling things correctly is a good part of this work. At 7:31 a.m., Ortiz sent me an image I stared at until the light in the room changed. A redwood trail marker, no number, just a clean face of wood, beneath which someone had scratched a line with a nail. We heard ourselves. I answered because the vigil had ended. That's the point. She wrote back, "I know." And then we didn't talk because good partners understand that sometimes doing nothing together is the most precise skill you can bring to a living thing. I went to work that morning with a thermos, and the gravel in my chest moved to the sides like someone had cleared a path with two hands. You can be suspicious of relief. That's healthy. Patterns don't quit after one good night. Habits grind. But that afternoon, when the weather station read the wind and the fire index and the barometer, it did not also read our names to us. The traffic report did not call me to the trail I had left. The office boiler was exactly a boiler, and I thanked it out loud for staying inside its job. That night, I slept without dream static for the first time since I walked out of the Olympic fog carrying a recorder that insisted on talking after I took its blood out. You should know I woke twice to make sure the vigil had not been an elaborate placebo. It hadn't. Placebos work too, but for smaller aches. This one, the body of a country learning how to not answer itself, needed an immensity we didn't have alone and somehow had exactly together. We scheduled the next vigil for the 13th of the following month because it is sometimes useful to teach miracle the math it rides. The second vigil made noise. Not the old kind, the cut-glass radio line that separated people from themselves, but human noise. Babies fussed. Coffee makers forgot their dignity. A rainstorm sprinted across the roof of a ranger barracks in Shenandoah, and some poor soul had to sprint with a bucket and a laugh he tried to keep under his breath. Vigil is not about perfection. It is about direction. At 3:17, the country still paused. The habit still searched. It still found fewer names on fewer wires, and in the places where the old pattern tugged hardest, Olympic, Redwood, Shenandoah, Glacier, the land remembered what to do when human beings made a quiet so steady the water could see its own face in it. I returned to Port Angeles between vigils and walked the harbor before sunrise, because I wanted to be the person who remembered the color before sun counted it. The ferry sounded its horn, long, unromantic, exactly the pitch you need to warn a smaller boat that it has misunderstood mathematics. A gull said something I won't translate. A man in a knit cap lifted a crate with the sort of care you give to simple things that will feed people. At Silver Creek, I found the station unboarded. Not open, not humming, unboarded. The person who had done it knew how to turn a pry bar without splitting planks. Eaves repaired. Door rehung. Dorsey's nameplate replaced with fresh metal, blank. The room smelled like dust without a personality, which is a good smell for a room that wants to be useful again. On the desk, a stack of new maps, a note written in a hand that traced clean lines. I didn't have to read the signature to feel the breath warp. Ethan's not letters had a geometry my body recognized. No broadcast devices north of 12. Analog only past the ridge. Silence hours posted at trailheads. If you hear your name, leave space for a different name. I laughed once because the last line was the kind you write when you are both gentle and clever, and I wished him a sandwich because you do that for people who should eat. I took one map and folded it the way you fold a letter you know you'll need to read and reread. The cartography showed 12 and 14 like the old pretense, but the half-mile between them was labeled something new, the listening hollow. The category type was not trail, it was practice. The icon was not a footprint, it was a palm. People would argue, of course they would. It is hard to tell your feet that a place is more for your belonging than your walking, but some would get it on the first pass. Some never would. Habits are honest that way. I left the station and took the long route to the marker, not to test anything, but to watch how the forest held its edge. The fog sat like a punctuation mark that had chosen not to end the sentence yet. On the path, a pair of boot prints forked and then changed their mind politely and rejoined. 2 children's sneakers mapped joy like the law had loosened. At the marker, I found a ribbon tied around the cedar's young trunk, not tight enough to bruise the bark. On it, someone had written, Rule 6, tell your quiet to someone else. I leaned my head against the cedar, because trees will hold you as long as you remember it is not their job, and said the names of the people I wanted to hear themselves. A mother in Albuquerque who works 3 jobs and sings at the sink. A medic in Knoxville who keeps late hours with a kettle and a widow's grief. The park aide who left Olympic the week we put the boards on and wrote me a letter that smelled like laundered cotton and hope. When I lifted my head, the ribbon had not moved. Neither had the fog. The world had not turned sacramental beyond its usual miracle. Good. We need room for ordinary. I began to walk back and felt it before I heard it, a pressure that made me think of damp paper held too long in a closed fist. Reflex said brace. Practice said widen. I placed my feet like a person making a bed, long pull, smooth corner. A figure stepped from the edge of the trail. Not Ethan, not anyone I knew. An older woman in a ranger jacket that had seen more seasons than mine. Her eyes carried every day of the work. She raised a palm and I matched it 10 feet apart, like we were negotiating an invisible pane of glass. You Leah? She asked. I am. Havelock said you'd be, she said, and the name hit the room. Man can't keep a cabin in one piece to save his life, but he can draw a map on the inside of your eyelids. Is he? Fine as anyone who knows he helped build a bell the country can't unring, she said. Then her face softened. Better since you started these quiets. Vigils, I said, because you named the thing you love so your mouth learns how to carry it. Vigils, she repeated, tasting it. Got word your no broadcast rule is causing chatter in D.C. Of course it is. Don't worry, the ones who shout the loudest need microphones to exist. She looked at the cedar, at the ribbon, at the brass. I came to ask if you'll let me run the schedule here. I've got 4 rangers and a mechanic who can sit still longer than a mountain. I'd be honored, I said, and meant it down to the part of me that was tired of being the reason the shape held. She nodded once, turned like she'd been practicing it her whole life, and melted into the trees as if someone had painted her there and then set the painting still wet into the world. I walked back to my truck with the soft stupidity of a person whose body finally believes a plan can keep breathing without her hand on its chest. At the gate, I put up a laminated sign with a hole-punched corner and a simple sentence, silence hours observed. 3:17 to 3:30 a.m. daily. Beneath it, smaller. Please hold the quiet with us. I drove to town, mailed more envelopes, and ate a sandwich, like people who want to live make. Thick tomato. Salt you can see. Bread that forgives sloppy architecture. A napkin you use like you know you deserve to be taken care of. The day sat there and did not demand my fear. You want me to tell you it's over. I want to tell you that too, but endings like markers are sometimes maintenance decisions we make to keep living. What I can tell you is a set of things that happened in a row. A month of vigils taught people how to put their hands back on their own pulse. The 3:17 habit stopped looking for us in so many places that the first time a traffic report passed that minute without a glitch, I laughed in a grocery aisle and scared a man trying to decide between 2 sizes of rice. In Redwood, Ortiz sent a photo of the Soundgarden basin, ferns up to the knee, cones softened into relics. She wrote, "We put a picnic table in the shade, and I cried into a paper towel because that is how you mark a site both as tender and retired." In Shenandoah, Hanks mailed me a hand-drawn map titled Rooms Where Quiet Works. They weren't places on a compass, they were behaviors. Turn off the radio before the gate, carry 1 story in your pocket, and say it to no one. Put soup on slow the night you keep watch. In Glacier, Bishop sent a voice memo so short it could fit on a breath. We sat, it held. I played it on low in the kitchen, and it didn't feed a thing, it fed me. In Olympic, the listening hollow earned a notation on a new internal chart. Practice area. The icon was still a palm. A young ranger named Sumi asked if she could carve a small bench from a fallen cedar. Only if you sand the edges, I wrote, and she sent back a picture of the smooth kindness she'd made for strangers' spines. Here is the part I will not gild. Sometimes at 3:17, a room still searches, a device hums. A name we didn't offer looks for a mouth. Weather does what weather does. Habits stumble on stairs. You hold the quiet anyway. You don't do it alone. You learn the distinction between silence as absence and silence as active regard. The first is emptiness. The second is love without spectacle. Now and then, someone new arrives in my inbox. An image of a marker from a park I haven't seen. A ribbon with Rule 6 written in a different hand. A palm drawn by a child, and taped to a refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a moose. The vigil is a country of small consent. That is what saves us. And Ethan, He keeps station at the edge of the hollow, the way paid attention keeps station to a life. Sometimes I see him with other rangers, palms out in greeting, a practice more than a hello. Sometimes I feel him at 317, like the warmth a chair has even after a person stands. Mostly, I do not need to seek him, because looking is another form of asking. Love, once it stops auditioning, knows where to sit. On the 13th vigil of the 13th month since the first one, I returned to Olympic because anniversaries don't ask your permission to matter. The fog laced the trees like handwriting you can read, even if you don't know the alphabet. I walked to the marker at 3:10 and sat on Sumi's bench because she had sanded it correctly. A raven performed their small comedy on a branch and got a peanut for their trouble. At 3:17, the hollow took a breath. Somewhere to my left, a deer decided nothing urgent would happen tonight. Somewhere to my right, a man at Lake Crescent put his elbow on a sill and didn't know he'd joined us. Somewhere beneath me, roots rewove a conversation they have been having since before people discovered how to add their names. I didn't hear the line. I didn't hear any line. I heard my own breath, and then, I want to say I didn't, but honesty has to earn itself. I heard Ethan's laughter under it, not over it. A harmony, not a theft. I didn't chase it. I let it pass through the room I was making with my body, and it did not linger where it wasn't asked to live. That is how you let a thing heal and not simply behave. When the vigil ended, I wrote in my notebook, "We starved a habit by feeding something better. We told the truth quietly until it could hear itself." Under it, I added, "The rules are not limits, they are names." On my walk out, a family in raincoats approached the kiosk, a mom pointing, two kids peering like detectives too small for shoes. That serious. The little one asked, "What's a listening hollow?" The mom read the sign and said, "It's where you practice not talking." The kid nodded, satisfied, the way children who trust their adults nod. I said nothing because that is how you bless a thing that is already correct. At the gate, a new placard hung below the usual warnings about weather and water and bears, who will do bear things if you do human things poorly. It read, "If you hear your name at night, it is not your cue. Carry your own sound. Leave space for a different name. Hold the quiet together." Someone had added a line in Sharpie. Block letters trying their best. Trail clear. Underneath, another hand had written, "Anomalies belong to us now." I laughed alone. Happy in a way you can be when you've made an agreement with mystery that neither of you will try to win. On my last evening in town, I walked the harbor again and thought about the way water keeps whatever rhythm we give it. Propellers, oars, skates, the slow push of someone who wants to stand where the cold can remind them they have feet. A ferry sounded its horn exactly once. A gull performed an aria. The weather considered rain and then decided no. Back in the apartment months later, the boiler did what boilers do. The fridge hummed and did not ask to be loved. At 3:17 a.m., I woke because some part of me still liked to make sure the world had kept its promise. And in the kitchen, I put my hand flat on the counter and felt my pulse say, "Present." No line came through the radio. No cadence tried to find my name. Somewhere in Shenandoah, a ranger leaned on a doorway and listened to his own lungs. Somewhere in Zion, someone placed a palm on hot rock and felt the day's heat remember itself to the night. Somewhere in Glacier, Bishop wrote, "We sat." It held in a logbook no one would digitize. Somewhere in Redwood, Ortiz walked the sound garden. that was now a picnic with ferns, and laughed when a child told her the trees were storing jokes. And in Olympic, a cedar lifted a new inch. We do not conquer the forest. We survive its patience. We keep each other from becoming our own echo. We leave space for a different name. The vigil continues. The country learns. When you drive north on a morning when the fog has decided to choose a valley and hold it, you might see a marker turn straight toward the trail, not coy, not backward. You might see a brass line and feel the urge to touch it. If you do, let your hand rest a second longer than politeness, as if you are greeting a person who kept a seat for you. Say nothing, say everything. Trail clear. No anomalies worth losing your voice to. And if, one day, a radio somewhere you forgot you still owned clicks at 3:17 and a breath gathers like weather, know this: you taught it how to stop. Put your palms down on a counter. Share the quiet with whoever is in the room. Let the habit find a room with no names in it. Then go make coffee and drink every drop. You are still here. The country can hear itself again. The world didn't end. It just learned how to whisper more quietly. Every ranger who's ever walked a trail alone knows this truth, that the forest doesn't need monsters to be haunted. It's haunted by us, by every voice that tried to own its silence, by every name carved into bark just to prove we were here. Now, when the fog rolls down from the ridge at dawn, it no longer hunts for answers. It listens. They say that at 3:17 a.m., if you stand at the edge of Silver Creek and let the wind pass through your hands, you can hear it, faint and low, a pulse moving beneath the soil, not a warning, a memory. Sometimes it sounds like Ethan's laughter. Sometimes it sounds like Leah's breath catching before a word. And sometimes, if the world is quiet enough, you'll realize it isn't their voices at all. It's your own, echoing back, softer, older, as if the earth itself is repeating after you. Trail clear, no anomalies. That's when you understand. The forest was never asking to be solved. It was asking to be heard. And maybe that's the secret all along. Not to fight the echo, but to let it remind us that silence isn't emptiness. It's the space where every story finishes its breath. So if you ever find yourself alone at mile marker 13, don't speak, don't call out, just listen. Because somewhere in that stillness, someone once did the same. And the forest has been listening ever since. If this story stays with you, let it remind you. Sometimes the scariest thing in the dark is how much it sounds like you. Subscribe for Mr. Darkness TV more stories. And remember, the forest never forgets those who listen.